Good evening, everybody. It's just gone 6:30, so we will make a start with this evening's Planning Committee. Before we go any further, though, can I just remind everybody that this meeting is being webcast for live and subsequent broadcast. You are consenting to being filmed by entering the chamber. If you are speaking this evening down here, please make sure that you adjust your microphone. I'm sure it's switched on, so that the red light is on like this, and that you turn it off after you've finished speaking. It is important because the microphones are linked to the webcasting. It also reduces the volume if we have two on at the same time. So we want to make sure everybody can hear what's being said. The committee is run as a paperless committee, so most members will have electronic devices with their papers on them this evening. Can I ask the committee clerk, please, to read out the public announcement?
Thank you, Councillor. Just two brief announcements for everyone here in the chambers this evening. Firstly, you are all welcome to use mobile electronic devices throughout the meeting. However, if you do wish to make or receive a telephone call, we ask that you please leave the chamber to do so. Secondly, we are not expecting a fire drill this evening in any event. However, if a fire drill does sound, please follow the council officers who will direct you to the mustering point at Queen's Gardens. We will now hear from the members who will now introduce themselves.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Scott, Chair of the Planning Committee.
Nicola Townsend, North Team Leader, Development Management.
Councillor Mohammed Ali, Vice Chair, Planning Committee.
Jason Perry, Councillor for South Croydon Ward.
Scott Roche, Councillor for Shirley South.
Councillor Chris Clark, Member of the Planning Committee.
Councillor Clive Fraser.
Good evening, my name is Pete Smith. I'm Head of Development Management at Croydon.
Laura Field, Deputy Team Leader, Development Management.
Felicity Flynn, Councillor for New Addington North.
Tony Letts, Councillor for Selhurst.
Oni O'Veary, Councillor for Purley and Woodcote. Her voice is going, sorry.
And my colleague also wishes to apologise for her voice having gone. So when she, if you see me speaking and her go, it's actually her. I'm Councillor Simon Brew, Purley Ward.
I'm Michelle Jerning, Committee Clerk.
Sean Murphy, Legal Advisor to the Committee.
Thank you very much, everybody. First item on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 21st of June. Are those agreed? Agreed. Right, thank you. Apologies. We have one apology. Councillor Brew is substituting for Councillor Street this evening. Disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest for the items before us this evening? No. We have no items of urgent business and there are no development presentations this evening, so that moves us on to the planning applications for decision. The running order is going to be 6.6, 6.3 and then 6.1, 6.2, 6.4 and 6.5. Item 6.5, I think it is won't actually be an item for decision. As we will hear a bit later on in more detail, that item will now be for decision as to whether we contest the appeal or not. It is item 6.5, isn't it? Sorry, 6.4. Sorry, that's item 6.4. OK. So, what moves us on to the first item then for decision, item 6.6, 114 Addiscombe Road, and the presenting officer is Pete Smith. When ready, please, Pete.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. So this item is an application for planning permission to demolish the existing house at 114 Addiscombe Road, and it involves the erection of a replacement building to provide 9 flats, and that's a mixture of 1-bed flats, 2-bed flats and 3-bed family flats, alongside the provision of some parking on site as well as some bike storage. Just taking members through the images, as you can see, it's a very large plot on the south side of Addiscombe Road. The width of the plot is significantly wider than the other properties on Addiscombe Road. It's approximately 3 minutes walk from Sandylands tram stop, and it has a PTAL, a public transport accessibility level of 4, which is termed as good. As you can see, detached properties, and that is very much the character of the area, but as I say, they are substantial properties. Moving on, you've got an aerial photograph. The actual plot itself and the house is set back from the main front building line of Addiscombe Road properties, which clearly gives an opportunity to bring a new building further forward. The land rises relatively steeply from Addiscombe Road frontage south, and rises more gradually as you go towards the south, the southern boundary. As I say, this is an aerial photograph of the site. You can see it's relatively heavily treed, which I'll come back to in some of the photographs. Again, this is a photo of the front of the property. There are some mature lime trees, I think they're lime trees or plane trees, along the frontage within the pavement itself. And you can see where that sort of blue bin is where the existing pedestrian access is up the path into the raised ground floor level of the proposed property. Sorry, the existing property. A view looking along Addiscombe Road, that's towards Shirley, and again looking the other way towards Croydon. And this area here is an existing access off the Addiscombe Road, which leads into a rather dilapidated garage. This view is looking, as you can see, it's a very overgrown garden. You know, the property's been vacant for some considerable time, and the garden has been allowed to vegetate fairly extensively, as you can see. It's very heavily treed, particularly on the boundaries, and particularly on the southern boundary of the site. The majority of trees that are proposed to be removed as part of this scheme are either C or U grade trees. There's proposed to have 22 trees removed. But the important aspect of this are the existing trees to the rear, which we have recently, as part of this planning application process, treated as designated as a TPO, and none of those trees are proposed to be affected by this development. This is the view from the property in Fitzjames Road, which is to the rear of the site, and this shows the existing trees, as I've said, which are now protected through a TPO. You can see that the distance from, and this is more or less taken from the rear patio of that house, a substantial garden again, and when you look at the distances between the proposed dwelling and this property, we're well in the region of about 65 metres distance. So in terms of window-to-window separation, it is incredibly generous. Moving on to the plans itself, because of the change in level, the actual entrance into the scheme is actually from a sort of sub-basement or semi-basement level, which takes you up from there into a raised ground floor raised ground floor element where the properties and where the flats will be situated. Again, as I said, it's proposed 9 flats. Basically, it's 3 flats on each floor, although the first floor has 4 flats, with access through the site for 5 proposed car parking spaces. We have consulted Transport for London as part of this scheme because Addiscombe Road is in fact part of the the highway network that's managed by TfL, and TfL, because of the PTAL level, were very concerned about the level of on-site parking, and were very keen and required a reduction in the amount of on-site car parking as part of the application process. So the level of parking has been reduced on site, and that's, as I say, due to the proximity of the sites to reasonably quality public transport. And as I say, Sandylands tram stop is literally 3.5 minutes walk away from this site, and and that will lead you straight into East Croydon Station and other opportunities for transport modes. Looking through the plan at this level, you can see, and I think I'll probably take you to this slide first, the basement plan shows that how you actually get into the development itself. But then as you move up to ground floor, the benefit for me, Chair, is that you then have a direct route from front to back, so that all residents of this development, and moving back to the previous slide, will be able to have access to a very generous rear garden with all the facilities that one would normally expect for a scheme of this scale. But also, and importantly, each of the flats would have their own private amenity space. The scheme, as it was first submitted, proposed an in and out for vehicular activity. But again, Transport for London were concerned about crossovers and vehicular activity onto the frontage, and therefore there is only one access onto the site. And as part of the scheme, TfL have requested that a contribution is made by the developer to contribute towards a crossing point within Addiscombe Road in close proximity to this site to provide a safe crossing place for not just this development but other residents within Addiscombe Road, which is a benefit to this scheme. Again, looking at the elevations, and it's important first of all to focus on the proposed mass of the building, and you can see first of all, I don't know if you can see it on the image, but you've got a red outline of the building as it currently sits on the site, and it's very similar in terms of scale and mass to an existing detached house. But we feel that the proportions and the scale and the way in which this sits within its context is absolutely fine in terms of its character and its appearance, its use of materials, its use of hip roofs, and how it presents itself to the street frontage. Again, moving to the rear elevations, it's proposed to have some recessed dormer windows that will be partially hidden by projecting bay details here, which again should prevent it should limit the amount of overlooking, if any, bearing in mind the extensive landscape screening between neighbouring gardens. Again, this is just a street elevation, again, just showing in context. The trees on the frontage are proposed to be retained, and because there's an existing embankment that will be partially maintained, we're satisfied that the trees on the frontage will be suitably protected as well, alongside the overall feel of the street and how this presents itself in Addiscombe Road. So, Chair, the application is for a grant of planning permission subject to conditions alongside a Section 106 agreement which deals with the issues of the importance of the pedestrian crossing in Addiscombe Road. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for clarification? No? Okay. I've just got one quick one. Presumably the entrance arrangement with the sort of semi-basement entrance, it reflects the sort of steep bank which runs up from Addiscombe Road onto the level of the existing and proposed property, where there's at the moment lots of sort of slightly odd sort of arrangements with garages set into the bank and large flights of steps and that kind of stuff to get up to those levels.
Yes, Chair, I think it's a good solution really in many ways because the amount of excavation is relatively limited. There will be some excavation at a relatively higher level for the parking of that single parking space. But in many ways, the overall feel of this site is going to be retained as it is. The rather unkept garage that is in place at the moment, it actually gives some separation to the neighbour next door. And just further along Addiscombe, there are some unpleasant relationships, in my view, Chair, around lower garages and how that works within the street scene. So I think it's quite a good solution.
Okay, thank you. Right, we've got three people wishing to address us. Ms Springer, who is an objector, Mr Terry, who is the applicant's agent, and Councillor Mohan is local ward councillor. If all three of you would like to come forward, please. You'll all have up to 3 minutes to tell us about your particular point of view on this application. Starting with Ms Springer first. So, Ms Springer, when you're ready, please.
Thank you. I'm speaking on my...
You don't have to press it, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'm speaking on mine and my neighbours' behalf at numbers 13, 15 and 17 Fitzjames Avenue. We all back onto the proposed development and for 112 Addiscombe Road, who are next door to it. I've lived in Croydon for over 30 years in different parts of the town, and I always thought the Whitgift estate would be a really great place to live one day, so I felt very lucky to be able to move there with my family 10 years ago. This was a really good reason to stay in Croydon rather than moving somewhere like Sutton, which has plenty of good-sized family housing. However, this development, if it goes ahead, will have a detrimental impact on our lives and the lives of our neighbours for the following reasons. A house would be replaced with a building more than 3 times larger with 9 flats. That's 19 bedrooms rather than 4 or 5, potentially up to 36 people living there rather than a family. This is clearly an overdevelopment compared to all the other homes on the estate, and the building is not in scale with surrounding buildings. It's therefore totally out of keeping with all the other family-sized homes in the local area. Nor does the building replicate a pair of semi-detached properties, which, according to the case officer's report, it has been designed to do. With 3 floors, plus a lower ground level floor entrance and floor-to-ceiling windows and balconies, including on the 3rd floor, this really would not resemble 2 semi-detached houses. The development will greatly increase the noise levels for everyone simply because of the number of people and number of households in the building and outdoor space and using the car park. There will be more noise from cars driving in and out of the development and the car park at the back of it. At the moment, ours and our neighbours' gardens back onto or adjoin other gardens. If this goes ahead, we'll back onto or adjoin a communal car park. So we'll have noise from cars starting and engines revving any time of day or night at the bottom of or next to our gardens. We'll have a loss of privacy from being overlooked, particularly in the winter when there's no leaves on the trees. As mentioned, this development is 3 stories high. Where there's currently a roof, there will instead be apartments with many floor-to-ceiling windows on all floors, as well as 4 balconies on the 2nd and 3rd floors looking out into our bedrooms, our living space and our gardens. At the side, there'll be windows overlooking into 112 Addiscombe Road, and with the new building being much bigger and closer than the current house, more noise and loss of light for the people living there. We're also concerned about lack of security, with the car park and communal garden at the back being easily accessible from the road. It would be easy for someone who doesn't live in the block to use the communal outside space to access our gardens. So we're asking the committee, please, when making your decision, to consider the impact of this development on our lives and the enjoyment of our homes and gardens, but also to consider the views of the 300 or so people who felt strongly enough about this to object. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have Mr. Terry. Mr. Terry, you have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am the applicant's agent. The proposal before you is the result of a long process of design development, which has fully involved the Croydon Planning Department. 2 pre-application submissions were made before making this formal submission, and the design was adjusted each time, fully addressing any concerns raised, whether that be from Tree Officer, Highways, Urban Design, or even Transport for London, as you know. The design, as presented, fully meets all the requirements asked of it in terms of local, London or national standards and policies. The proposed development ticks all the planning boxes. The new building would replace 1 single family unit with 9 apartments, but this would include 3 3-bedroom family units. All of these family units will have substantial and truly usable external private spaces, each in fact being over 17 square metres in area. All the flats will in fact have private amenity spaces, all carefully designed to avoid overlooking of neighbouring gardens, and on top of this they all have access to a significant amount of communal amenity space, including a feature sensory garden, plus they have full access via the provision of a lift. On-site car parking numbers have been specifically dictated by Transport for London, but the provision of cycle storage and refuse collection areas fully meets Croydon's policy requirements. The proposed building is designed to sit well in from the boundaries. The closest it gets is in fact nearly 5 metres. This leaves significant areas of soft landscaping all round, making sure it sits comfortably on the plot. The design reflects the traditional character of the surrounding houses and has been designed to read more like two large houses rather than one block of flats. It's also limited in its depth, so it does not intrude on the outlook of its neighbours. It therefore fully respects the character of the area, and given the existing house is derelict, will in fact enhance the character of the area. This site is residential land. It lies on a busy commuter route, close to a tram stop, not far from the town centre. It is not buried inside a neighbourhood where it would be incongruous. The plot is very substantial, almost double the size of its neighbours. It is in fact just short of half an acre in size. But it contains one single dwelling. Half an acre, just one dwelling. Surely, if there was ever a site that matched the criteria set out in the Croydon Local Plan 2018 for development to meet the housing needs of the borough, this is the one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Mohan?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for giving me the chance to speak on behalf of my residents. This is a very controversial and contentious application. We've had over 300 residents opposing it, including the local Labour MP and the GLA member. Now, I have three basic reasons to oppose this application. First of all, this is completely out of character with the area. So I was really surprised to read the officer's report, which said that it would preserve the character of the area and would not harmfully affect the appearance of the street scene. Nothing could be further from the truth. All of you have driven down the Addiscombe Road, you know exactly what the area is like. Both sides of the roads have detached family properties. The nearest block of flats is behind the Sandilands tram stop, which is hundreds of meters away. And also, this development backs onto the Whitgift estate, or is very much part of the Whitgift estate, which is one of the sort of gems of Croydon, I would say, in terms of our built heritage. And if this development is allowed to go through, I think this is the thin end of the wedge, and it could lead to the destruction and the flatting over of the Whitgift estate. And I think that's something we really want to prevent in Croydon, because we want to preserve these kind of unique areas of residential areas rather than destroy their character. The Croydon plan states that development proposals should respond to and enhance the local character, and the local plan for Addiscombe states that new development will respect the existing local character and distinctiveness. And I think on both these grounds, this application completely fails. So I think if we want to preserve our built heritage in Croydon, I think rejecting applications like this is really the starting point. The second reason is, as Cleo very eloquently put it, is the impact this will have on the amenities of the adjoining occupiers, especially numbers 13 to 17 Fitzjames Avenue and 112 to 116 Addiscombe Road. This will be a large building, overbearing, overlooking their back gardens and their properties. They will suffer from noise, lack of privacy, and probably a lack of light as well. So I think in terms of trying to preserve the amenities enjoyed by local residents, I think that once again this application fails. And finally, there's an issue about traffic. We will have cars turning in and out of this building, which on the main Addiscombe Road, which is very busy, especially in the mornings. And I think the last thing we want to do is to be adding traffic to an already busy major arterial route. But my main objection is around the loss of character of the area and the fact that this building is the sort of thin end of the wedge. And I think if we allow such applications to go through, we will really see the destruction of the Whitgift estate. And I think we all want to preserve it and not go down this route. So I urge you once again to reconsider the officer's recommendation and reject this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you. Okay, do officers have anything further they wish to add?
Yes, if I may, Chair, I'd just like to add just a couple of points. Just for a matter of clarity, and I know the local MP has not, we've received no objection to this application from the local MP. So just to make that clear. Well, that's just a matter of fact. In terms of the issues of privacy, and it's in the papers before you, as members will know, that the standard window-to-window separation that we look for in terms of privacy and protection is 20 metres window-to-window, although sometimes we do accept less than that. But in this particular case, the proposed building would be 28 metres from the rear boundary of Fitzjames properties. and then 70 metres from the rear elevation of those properties. So that is a significant distance, bearing in mind that there is a very heavily treed boundary between those properties. So any consideration of privacy loss would not be sustained on appeal. I think the final point for me, Chair, is first of all the siting of the building. It is set well back from the boundaries, and I think the image that's on the screen at the moment really does show good quality separation between the neighbouring properties. And that's, to my mind, what the character is. It's large properties, whether they're detached or appearing as conjoined houses or whatever. It's the important factor is the the distance and the feeling, still the feeling of spaciousness on large plots, but still accommodating, potentially more people. And that's what the plan is seeking to do. It's seeking to deliver more housing, more sustainably, particularly in areas that are reasonably attractive in terms of public transport accessibility. And this scheme performs that role. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, there's just one further point I wanted to pick up on Councillor Mohan's point regarding the transport on Addiscombe Road and the highways. Addiscombe Road is actually the responsibility of Transport for London, and as part of this application they were consulted on the application. They do consider all applications on their highway network incredibly seriously, and they've not raised an objection to the single point of access, and also this scheme brings the benefit of a contribution towards improved pedestrian access and across the road in this location.
And so just to be very clear, in terms of this point on character is about the sort of built form, the nature of the buildings, the way that buildings relate to each other. It isn't to do with what the tenure or internal subdivision of those buildings are. So, in other words, individual houses being replaced by buildings that are divided into flats is not against the character in that sense. Is that correct?
Yes, certainly. Residential uses include houses and flats, so the occupancy, whether it be of a house or a flat, that would still be within residential character of an area.
And so the fact that there are no flats and immediately adjacent would not be a relevant factor in this consideration?
No, that's the case. Flats are considered to be acceptable in this area, and as we heard from Mr Smith's presentation earlier on, we are only 3.5 minutes from the tram stop, and there are flats within very close proximity, close to that tram stop.
Okay, thank you. So I'll open this to the committee. Councillor Letts.
Chairman, I think this is a very sensitively done, this particular planning application. There was a house there which obviously had not been lived in for some time, and I think this must be a great improvement for local people. I think the design is very much in the character of the area. And I think also, and I must say I'm no longer a member of the Whitgift Foundation. I felt 22 years was enough there. But to bring the Whitgift properties into it is wrong, because they have their own rules and regulations to go through. So we're not discussing something on Whitgift land. We are discussing two houses. And I think it'll make wonderful homes, very near public transport. And if it's accommodating younger people, I have to tell you, most young people in my family ride bicycles. So I'd like to move approval.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think clearly this is a development site. Sadly, the building has been left to rot and decay, which is a shame, because clearly it was once a nice property, but it has been left to decay. So it is now a development site, and I think we would all accept that. I think we also accept the plot is bigger than normal for the area. It is a much wider plot. But the scheme and the proposal, it's on higher ground, so it's quite a dominant property and quite a dominant plot within the local street scene. And this idea of character, I think you could quite easily have put two detached houses here, two detached family homes could have gone on here, and that would have gone in with the character, in keeping with the area, and would not have looked out of place. But the proposal we have is pretending to be two detached houses, but then we have the link building joining them together, and we then have the sort of sub-basement ground floor access being put in the front, which is something that is totally out of character with that locality and will look different to everything else around it. So I think character is important, and what's being proposed here is not the same character as that is around it. And I think the fact it is a dominant site is going to have much greater impact on the street scene than many other schemes that we see. I think the introduction of parking into the rear garden is a shame. It means we're putting a road in at the side of the house, which we don't currently have. So the adjoining occupier at 116 will have a road and vehicles travelling next door to their garden, which they don't have currently. And then in the rear, we're going to have the introduction of parking again. So what, you know, it is a wilderness currently, but it is a garden, and that will now become a sort of reasonably sized car park in the rear, which will have an impact on those in Fitzjames Avenue and also in Addiscombe Road. So I think whilst I accept it's a development site, I think you could put something quite substantial here, and I think that would meet a housing need. I think 9 flats don't necessarily meet the need that the borough actually has at the moment. So for me, this scheme doesn't work. I think it's an overdevelopment by dint of its size and massing, its impact on the street scene, and that combined with the parking and highways will cause a loss of amenity for adjoining occupiers. I so move refusal, Chairman.
Thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Fraser, and I'll bring in myself.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, this scheme does actually contribute to housing need, meeting housing need in the borough, and therefore should be welcomed in that aspect alone. However, we do have a responsibility to treat each scheme on its merit, and that's the correct way to look at this. I think in treating each scheme on its merit, looking at this scheme on its own merits, it does not predict or affect any future decisions that will come up in terms of planning regulations and planning controls, and the rest of it gives state. So I think we need to look at this scheme in its own merits. I thought the scheme was quite sensitively designed. I note in para 8.5, from the road, it's actually lower in height, 9.6 metres than the current building, 9.8 metres. So that's of benefit in some aspects in terms of dominance. Secondly, in 8.7, it's clearly within the sort of the density habitable rooms per hectare ratio for this area. So therefore, in my view, it is quite an acceptable scheme. I can understand the residents' concern about parking to the rear, but it's difficult to accommodate parking, particularly on that busy road, and I think that's probably, in this site, is acceptable. Therefore, on that basis, I'm quite happy to second approval for the scheme.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring myself in. I'm not going to repeat what's been said. I think it is a well-considered scheme on a very large site, as we've heard, and can certainly accommodate these 9 homes. It's really good to see the majority of those are family-sized units as well, who'll be able to take advantage of that large garden out the back. Overlooking distances and impacts on neighbours will be minimal, given the significant overlooking separation distances. And I think actually the entrance arrangement is sensible, given, and I know this site very well, I live very close to this. The steep bank does cause all sorts of issues, and there are quite a few unattractive arrangements at the fronts of a number of the buildings along there. This is a much better approach to those, and is also, whilst I can understand the concerns of having 4 parking spaces to the rear, to some extent, having a frontage that's totally dominated by cars would probably have a more negative impact on the character of the area. So I will certainly be supporting this application. So is anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Brew.
Thank you, Chair. Many of the points I was going to make have actually already been made by my colleague, Councillor Perry, so I haven't got as much to add as I expected. The 2 particular points that concerned me were the rear car park, which is, someone said engines might rev and so on at all hours of the day and night, and that is obviously much worse than having a garden. And secondly, I didn't like the concept of a half basement, which again is completely out of character with the rest of the area. area. So I personally move refusal following... sorry, I second, beg your pardon. I second refusal following Councillor Perry.
Okay, does anybody else wish to contribute? No, we've got two motions before us then. First of those to be completed was for approval, moved by Councillor Letts and seconded by Councillor Fraser. And then we have a motion for refusal, moved by Councillor Perry on grounds of overdevelopment due to size and massing, impact on the street scene and amenity of neighbours. And that was seconded by Councillor Brew. So we'll take the first of those first. So can I see those in favour of approval?
6.
And those against?
4.
So that is approved and the second motion falls. Thank you. Okay, moves us on to the second item before us this evening, item 6.3, which is the Queen's Hotel on Church Road. Presenting officer on this application is Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. This application is for the demolition of parts of the existing Queen's Hotel, which is an existing hotel that's been up in Crystal Palace, up in Alwood, since Victorian times. When the Crystal Palace came to Crystal Palace, the Queen's Hotel accompanied that, so it's got historic associations with the Crystal Palace area. So the proposal is to demolish parts of the existing buildings, towards at certain parts of the existing building, but also mostly the east-west spine wing, which I'll come on to in a minute. It's also proposing some further rooms to the hotel, alongside some additional car parking. It's proposing a new east-west spine building to accommodate hotel accommodation that is maybe more fit for purpose for a hotel in the 21st century. It's also seeking to extend the existing front range of buildings to the southwest of the building to provide further accommodation, and significantly it's seeking to reclad a 1970s extension and remove various historic canopies to that 1970s extension, as well as some previous canopies to the entrance of the building, seeking to provide enhanced landscaping and some coach parking. Now, if I can draw members' attention to the report, first of all, if I may, before I take you through the photographs and the images. I just want to first take you to page 47, which is where we're talking about the proposed floor space. And whilst we're talking here of a creation of 495 room hotel, the proposal, because of its demolition, seeks to remove certain rooms, seeks to remove 104 rooms as a consequence of the demolition, but then provide some new accommodation. And what's significant is that the net additional accommodation is 161 rooms, so just to make that clear. The other aspect of this, as I've said, is an increase in on-site car parking, and the net increase, there's an existing spaces of around sort of 60 spaces at the moment. The net increase on-site car parking proposes 144 spaces. I'll come on to the significance of that, if I may, later on in the presentation. Now, I want to now, if I may, refer members to the addendum that's before you this evening. Because the council, we've received a number of further letters and correspondence from various parties, and I need to draw members' attention to that. Yes, in the run-up to finalising the report, I started receiving a number of letters of support and I think that's referred to in the report. But since that time, I've received a further 517 letters of support for the scheme, but the vast majority of those are pro forma letters with names and addresses attached, but they're raising similar issues to the points and previous letters of support that are highlighted in the report. More recently, I've received a further 40 pro forma letters of objection, advised to be submitted from local businesses, and again they raise similar issues as highlighted in the report. I just wanted to draw members' attention to the fact that the Norwood Society did in fact refer the planning application to Planning Committee, which brings them more into focus around the comments that they were making as part of their comments. The majority of those points are actually summarised in the report anyway, but I just wanted to identify those because they were particularly important because of their referral rights. It's also referring to a number of additional plans. They're not new plans, they're just for clarification around the extent of demolition, which is important to manage if this scheme comes forward and receives a planning permission. Then we need to be absolutely clear as to the extent of demolition in view of its conservation status. And finally, Chair, there's some further information on coach parking, but I'm also recommending, Chair, that a further planning condition be attached to this, and it comes to issues that the report covers, which is around accessibility to the hotel by, to existing public transport opportunities. The site is relatively close to Crystal Palace Overground and Network Rail Station, and it's on a well-used bus route, as we know. But I think it's also important, as the hotel becomes more established, that there are better links to other transport nodes, particularly East Croydon and West Croydon, particularly East Croydon, when people come in from Gatwick. So I'm recommending, Chair, that there is a further condition which requires a guest transfer management plan, which will be in the form of a minibus of some description, which then the hotel will be able to use to actually have that in place so that guests can actually reach the hotel more sustainably but also more conveniently. Thank you for that. Now I want to take members back to the committee report, if I may, just to bring members who weren't, have recently joined the council or the planning committee a bit of historical background to this case. The case was in fact presented, or a previous application was presented to this committee towards the autumn of last year, and in fact was refused planning permission in November 2017. And on page 50 of your papers this evening gives details of the reasons for those refusals. Now, the first one was based on overdevelopment of the site, and it was linking the scale of the extensions and the appearance of those extensions which failed to preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the Church Road conservation area. The second reason for refusal was relating to the intensification of the hotel use associated with the proposed development and the linked to the low levels or relatively low levels of public transport accessibility, and how that linked through to the amount of on-site car parking that was proposed at the time. So there were the two reasons for refusal, and following that refusal, the applicant has in fact appealed to the Secretary of State recently over the last 3 or 4 weeks. We've received an appeal against that decision, and we've been advised by the Planning Inspectorate that that is due to be heard by a public inquiry. So they've actually feel that it's of significance that it should be considered by a public inquiry. We don't have any dates, and it's an early stage of the planning appeal process, but I just want to make members aware that that refusal is the subject of an appeal. Now, moving on to 2018, and as some members of this committee will be aware, we had a pre-application submission following the refusal of planning permission on the 11th of January, which is, if you like, a starting point of a reconsideration of the scheme and how the applicant addresses the reasons for refusal. And in your papers, we summarise again on page 51 the comments that this committee made. I appreciate that a number of members at this committee today weren't present at that session, but it gives a flavour from the local planning authority's point of view what thoughts were given at that stage. Now, the reason for the pre-application was that the applicant is obviously seeking to try and respond positively to the reasons for refusal. Now, on page 52, over the page, and I'm sorry that I'm not taking you through the images, but I just want to bring you all up to speed with where this is. On paragraph 4.2, it actually gives an indication as to what has changed since the previous refusal. And the first change is a reduction in the number of hotel bedrooms, and that's reduced down by 35 rooms. And how that's been achieved is by reducing the scale of the development. It's reduced the scale of the development, particularly the east-west spine road, and I'll come back to that in a minute. It's also increased the number of on-site car and coach parking spaces. So, compared to the previous refuse scheme, a further 37 spaces have been provided within the basement. It's been achieved through a slight enlargement of the basement and a reconfiguration of the basement. The current car parking ratio at the moment on the site is 0.2 parking spaces on site per room. The refuse scheme had 0.32 spaces per hotel bedroom, and now that proportion has now gone up to, I think, to 40.42 parking spaces. So you can see the car parking ratio has increased. So the amount of on-site car parking has been increased relatively significantly. As I say, there's a reduction in the scale and the mass, which I'll come on to in the images. And the other point that the Planning Committee made at the pre-application stage, and it flows back to the refuse scheme, was the overly complex nature of the elevational treatment of the new extensions that were proposed. So there has been a simplification of the external design elements, which I'll take members through in the presentation. There's been an increase in the number of family rooms available, which are important in terms of giving flexibility to hotel and the offer that they have to make, and also modifications to the forecourt area to accommodate 5 coach parking spaces. And the previous scheme, when it was considered at committee, there was debate around coach parking and the availability of space on site, but also the availability of coach layover spaces off site. Sorry to take members through that, but I want to really bring you all up to speed with where we are with this scheme. Thank you. Now, moving on to the images. So this is an aerial photograph of the Queen's Hotel, which is, as you say, this is Church Road here, the main frontage. Fitzroy Gardens is this street down here, and it bends round into a cul-de-sac here, and this is Wakefield Gardens at the bottom. The building is locally listed, and the conservation area boundary basically excludes the Fitzroy Gardens properties. So this area of open space, which is important in terms of conservation area character, is within the conservation area, and a number of the comments that have been made by residents have been talking about the importance of this green for them as an amenity space, but also in terms of how the existing building responds to that space. And I'll take members through some photographs and some images of that later on. Again, looking at the site plan, you can see this is what I'm talking about with the east-west spine building. Taking members back briefly, you can't actually see it here, I'm afraid, but at the end here, at this part here, is a mews, an old, part of the old mews building of the original hotel, which clearly before Fitzroy Gardens was significantly larger, and the proposal is to retain part of the mews building. So moving on, so this is the mews building at the bottom here. This is the east-west spine road, and as you can see towards the southern part of the site is a vacant part of the site which previously had a building on it as part of the original hotel range but was lost to fire some time ago. Now, these are some images of the frontage of the building as we see it today. And this is within the forecourt itself, which is currently used for parking and servicing. And this is part of the issue that is currently, some issue for local residents is how one manages this space with a hotel already of the size of the hotel that it is, but how you manage the comings and goings, the safety of guests when they're entering the site, but also then how one deals with the dropping off and picking up of guests, whether it be by coach or by car or by taxi. Moving on to the next image, this is looking the other way, and this really features the 1970s extension to the hotel. It's a relatively brutalist architectural response to how one would deal with the sort of, the Regency form of the original hotel. And this is very much, as you see the scheme coming forward, very much an important part in how we see that this scheme, arguably could enhance the character of this building in the conservation area because of the way in which it is proposed to treat this, relatively unsuccessful, in our view, approach, which is clearly in need of some improvement, alongside the removal of the canopies, the various canopies, and also the scheme proposes the removal of this sort of lift overrun feature, which again will significantly enhance the appearance of the building. So moving members through the site, this is on the northern side of the site, and this is it has a very steep, relatively steep sloping site from east to west, which very much forms the way in which the scheme has come forward. So this is the existing ramp down into the rear part of the site, which is currently used for servicing and some car parking. And these two images here are the residential properties immediately to the north, which are set back quite considerably from the boundary, and as you can see, with a fairly heavy tree hedge screen alongside that northern boundary. These views are within the service yard, and this is the existing east-west spine that is proposed to be demolished. As you can see, it's been modified over the years. Inside, it is certainly not fit for purpose in terms of hotel accommodation, with lots of different levels and changes in level. Disabled access is almost non-existent within this part of the building. And I would suggest, Chair, that it's, in terms of looking for a longer-term future for this hotel, the existing east-west wing has got a lot to be desired in terms of its function, but also how it, how one manoeuvres within that building. This view is looking at the rear part of the 70s extension, which again has an opportunity to be significantly enhanced. Moving on, if I may, now we're moving into the neighbouring residential streets, and you can see this is really an important image, which is looking from the cul-de-sac, as I've just mentioned, and this is the rear part of the east-west spine, which in many ways has a relationship to the street and to the neighbouring properties. And when I was on site, and there's been previous discussions around level of overlooking between the neighbouring properties and in the vicinity of this particular bay window. So this is looking back. And we feel, even with the changes and the extensions that are coming forward, that issues of privacy, because of the angle of the elevations, but also the distance that one has in play, the scheme worked successfully in terms of window-to-window separation. The image at the top here is the view from the neighbouring properties to the rear of the Mews building. As you can see, it's heavily covered in ivy. There's no change proposed to the rear part of the Mews building, which will be retained as it is. Moving on to the images, and these are the ones that I'm going to be taking members back to, which is again the views and the feel that you get from within what's called the Regency Gardens. Now this is again the view looking at that sort of element that you could see at the end of that cul-de-sac, which has a presence within Regency Gardens alongside the existing east-west spine road, and similarly looking from the gardens towards the existing hotel, and you can see that the existing hotel with its chimney and with its other elements, has a relatively strong presence within that view. And it's very much, when you see the plans I'll take you through in a minute, you really can then get a feel for whether, when you look at that view and you look at the complexity of those views and the mismatch of the buildings that are there at the moment and the incidental and historic changes that have taken place, whether whether the scheme does preserve or enhance, whether it's a neutral impact. Okay, taking you through the plans. Again, this is the proposal for the new east-west spine. It's on different levels and it takes account of the changes in levels. So the proposal is at ground floor. Here we have our 5 coach parking spaces with the existing hotel range in play, with the existing 1970s extension to the side, which has got a lower level and then a further sort of 4-storey element to it. So this is very much the 1970s element. It's also, you can see the proposal for the new extension to the south-west, alongside with the, it's slightly off your slide, I'm afraid, but this is the retained part of the Mews building at the end. This is at lower ground, as you can see. As the building slopes, as the site slopes down, you still have a relationship as you step down through the site. So this is the ramp that takes you down into the basement car park. With, again, you can just see the edge of the retained Mews there. And again, as we move through the building, the southwest extension along with the east-west spine road coming forward. And again, taking you through. Again, this is at the lower ground forever. There is still a relationship as you go through and down through the site with the changes in levels, that you still get a relationship, albeit with some rooms that are either don't have any windows or you have light wells to actually accommodate some light and some outlook from these lower level bedrooms. And then it takes you into the basement. I'm not going to take you through the basement plans, but there's basically car parking shown within different levels within the basement. Now, moving on to the elevations, and I wanted to draw members' attention to the planning history again, I'm afraid, and it takes us back to 2014, because in 2014 there was, I think, let me get my facts right, I think it was 2014. So it was granted in April 2015. The council has already, or the local has already granted planning permission for an existing or a previous extension, the southwest extension, as I call it, and you can see in the papers, the applicant has sought to discharge the pre-commencement conditions on that consent, and has now commenced. Well, we are satisfied that a material start on site has taken place, so there is an extant planning permission in relation to that previous extension. Just that's a matter of fact, and it's something that members need to take into account in terms of the consideration of the proposal for the southwest extension to the existing hotel. Now, taking members through proposed and existing elevations, in the papers you will see that some reference has been made to this single-storey addition to the hotel, which is part of the original hotel, and originally there was a similar single-storey addition at this side of that piece there. So Historic England have raised, think that it's unfortunate that that will be removed, but again, looking at it in the balance and looking at it in the range of other improvements that are being taken place, they are satisfied that the removal of that little element is satisfactory. And this really shows the proposed building coming forward. It shows the recladding of the 1970s extension, very much looking at window proportions that seek to take a cue from the window proportions and the rhythm of the existing elevations, and similarly a similar approach is taken to the southwest extension also. Moving on to the view, this is the plans from Regency Gardens, and you can see again the variation in height, the additions, the chimney, and the way in which that responds, and you can see the change in level. And again, this is the way in which the scheme now seeks to address that relationship. Now, before I'll show members comparison between the previously refused scheme and this scheme, but what we've been very much working with the applicant is to actually get some verticality to the way in which that the extensions present themselves to this garden, with using different colour brickwork between the recessed elements and the more projecting elements, but then looking at a continuous approach to metal cladding to the recessed roof volumes. I'll show you the differences in a later slide. Again, moving, this is the northern elevation. Again, stepping down. These are very much the existing, this is the existing treatment, albeit modified slightly to the existing 70s extension. And again, these elements here are clearly recessed back into the site. This scheme seeks to show the existing retained mews at the back with the ivy that I drew your attention to in the slides, but then these elements step back as you move up the site, and that's very much an important relationship, first of all, to the existing properties within the gardens and the streets themselves, but also the relationship to Regency Gardens. Now, moving on to the comparisons between the refused scheme and the current scheme. Now, the main concern, I think, that came from the member discussion was, first of all, I think, officers recommended this scheme, but I think members were concerned about how the scheme sought to do a bit too much in terms of what it was trying to do. It was trying to be contemporary, it was trying to look at variety, it was trying to look at different sort of details and brick patterns, which in many ways overcomplicated the elevational treatment and drew attention to it. The other important issue, I think, that came out was really the scale and mass of the extension, particularly as you came down the hill and its relationship to the first house, and how it basically presented itself to the Regency Gardens. And as you can see, the main change has been the way in which it's become much more vertical, but also these elements, and this is where the reduction in the rooms has taken place, through taking some floors off the rear part of the East-West Spine building. Moving on to some CGIs. Again, this is the refused scheme, which again sought to look at some brick patternation, look at something that tried to become a bay, recessed bay, didn't quite work, different colouring, and there was discussion at pre-app around simplifying it and being more honest around how it seeks to present itself. And it's looking now at a single brick colour, but it's looking at some stone dressing around the windows, good recessed windows to give some depth and some shading to the windows. And it's very much looking at a more contemporary approach to a more traditional form. And that's very much how we've been working with the applicant, and we think that's definitely something that has taken us in a positive way as part of this process. Similarly, looking at it from the other side of Queen's Road, a similar approach has been taken to the 1970s building. Again, using a similar form, a similar approach, and again simplifying the rhythm and the way in which the windows present themselves, with recessed elements for the staircases that link the whole hotel together. Again, just some detail around that, and this is the side elevation of the east-west spine. Again, looking at different brick coloration, recessed windows, and how that presents itself. Again, with the scheme coming forward, the hotel is wanting to look at much better disabled access with disabled lifts, linking into a new, more contemporary canopy entrance porch to the hotel. And again, that's linked through to a much better sort of landscape treatment to the main frontage. Finally, I'm going to take members through some CGIs from the green, and hopefully members can see this. This is the existing photograph. It's one I showed earlier, which is again looking at the scale and the mass of the main hotel. This element here showed the way in which the refused scheme presented, and there hasn't been a huge amount of change in many ways to that view, apart from the way in which the buildings are broken down and made much more vertical, and you can read them as separate elements as part of the elevation. I think the important change has really been here, looking towards, looking the other way within the gardens. And in our view, and I know, in this photograph here, the trees aren't in leaf, and in this CGI they are, but I think it's quite important to see how the buildings do lose themselves as you move down the hill, and actually sort of link that through, we feel, quite sensitively to the way in which the building presents itself to the Regency Gardens. So I'm going to leave you with a comparison. This is the hotel as we see it today. I appreciate it's a CGI, but it's taken from an existing photograph. And this is how the scheme is now proposed, Chair. We do recommend a planning permission. We feel that the applicant has made significant strides in terms of dealing with the reasons for refusal. I think it's important for members not just to focus on the reasons for refusal. This is a scheme that's presented to you again for consideration, but you need to be mindful of, when you consider the issues that the scheme addresses, you need to think about the previous reasons for refusal as well, and how the scheme addresses that. Car parking and the residents, there's been a lot of comment from local residents, as you can see, and it's quite a controversial application. That's why I wanted to really bring members up to speed with the scheme as it's currently presents itself. We feel that the hotel is in dire need of improvement, and I think that's part of its problem in many ways. It's grown incrementally. It hasn't kept up to date with current hotel standards. It is very popular. It's very popular in terms of a certain group of residents and guests, and there's clearly an opportunity to widen the patronage of the hotel and actually generate much more interest for Crystal Palace and Upper Norwood, but also generate business for the district centre and the Upper Norwood district centre. Because, people will use this hotel to get into town and to use central London facilities, no doubt about it. But they will be staying at this hotel, and there will be opportunities and there will be a desire to enjoy the fruits and the opportunities that Crystal Palace offers. So there will be benefits. There will be benefits for the local economy. There will be benefits for local business. And it will really bring this hotel back up to something that we can be proud of as a borough. So, Chair, I recommend the scheme to you this evening. There are a number of Section 106 obligations which we're seeking and discussing with the applicant. The most important one for me of the range is around employment and training. There are requirements under our SPD around jobs and apprentice jobs for, whilst this scheme is coming forward in terms of the construction phase, but clearly there's an opportunity for local people to be employed within the hotel itself with associated training. So, Chair, I recommend the scheme to you and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions, clarification? I'm happy to go with two to start with. Firstly, obviously, we've heard already that the applicant has appealed against the decision already made. And obviously, that's going to public inquiry. It's going to cost us a considerable amount of money, probably close to £100,000 or so, I would imagine. Has the applicant indicated that they will withdraw that appeal if the decision goes in their favour this evening? And secondly, how do we ensure that we secure Phase 4, which is the recladding of the rather unattractive 1970s addition? Given that that's the last phase, how do we make sure that everything else doesn't happen and that just gets left as it is?
Thank you, Chair. Answering the first point first, when this application was submitted, we wanted to, and because of its importance and because we knew it was going to be a controversial application, I wanted to enter into a planning performance agreement, which is a standard arrangement whereby you have some targets around how you're going to engage with the applicant and how they engage with the local community. And as part of that process, there was the discussion about whether we might expect an appeal against the previous refused scheme. So on that, with that being the case, the planning performance agreement basically states that if an appeal is submitted, but if there is a resolution and a grant of planning permission in respect of this application, then the applicant would withdraw that planning appeal. So that is in our PPA, and I would expect and anticipate and would be very upset if the applicant didn't do that. And if they didn't do that, I think we would have good grounds for costs, bearing in mind, assuming and presuming that this planning committee accepts this current and grants planning permission or resolves the grant planning permission for this scheme. The second point, and you're quite right, Chair, and I think as I said in my presentation, the 1970s recladding is hugely important. And in many ways, the operator is currently refurbishing the hotel internally anyway. And it is the last phase of the scheme. Now, how we would work with that, we're looking at a Section 106 agreement, which we're already talking about, around preventing occupation of certain parts of the hotel until such time as those works have been undertaken or are substantially underway or contracts signed or progressing. I haven't got the detailed wording sorted out yet, Chair, but that's what we will be expecting. And if we don't get a scheme and an approach through the 106 that guarantees that that will come forward, then we'll be coming back to you, Chair. So it's very much the intention that we will use the Section 106 to deliver the important parts of the scheme.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Roche?
Hello. I understand that when local people and businesses were asked to sign a pro forma letter of support, that it was quoted that the local economy would benefit by 2.3 million per year. I just wanted to find out where that data was gathered, what survey was used for that.
That's something that the applicant presented as part of the planning submission. The 2-point-something million, I think, was more reflective of what the hotel in total could provide, not just the extension. And I might have to leave it to the applicant maybe to respond to that within their sort of presentation. But what generally works through this is through room, through the size of hotel, what the likely spend is going to be, what the likely room rate is going to be, and that very much then gives an indication through modelling of what that likely spend is going to be. My report, I think, tried to take a more pragmatic and realistic view, and I don't think one should necessarily rely totally on figures, but I think, notwithstanding that, bearing in mind that this site is literally 5 minutes walk away from the centre of Crystal Palace District Centre or Upper Norwood District Centre, there's clearly going to be benefit to that local centre. How much that is, it's not just to the local businesses, but it's clearly in terms of local people who might be employed, and therefore they will get employment out of this as well. So I think it's going to be of benefit. Whether it's, I don't think it really matters what it is, but it's clearly going to be of benefit, and I think that is a significant issue which outweighs any harm that they might be in terms of any of the extensions that are proposed.
Okay, Councillor Ali.
Hi. My question is more to do with the car parking spaces. Given the number of car parking spaces and the ratio, the 0.42 per room, the fact that they will be charged for any parking spaces and the effect of that on the local streets, and the London plan is suggesting 10 to 11 coach spaces, why are we not asking for further increase in the number of coach parking to alleviate that? And the second part to that is that I appreciate the picking up people from the train station and dropping them at the hotel through a coaching from one end to another. Could that be extended to a pick and drop service for people who might be able to park elsewhere but use the coach to take them to the hotel? With the view that that will alleviate pressure on the local parking and the residents' issue against as well.
I will respond to those, and maybe my colleague might want to come in as well. In terms, yes, yeah, you're right. TfL, and the way the London plan is drafted does suggest that for a hotel of this side, one would normally expect 11 coach parking spaces. We are. I mean, first of all, I think there's an issue then of the capacity of the site, even as it is existing, to accommodate that amount, and whether one could reasonably expect that level of coach parking requirement. We believe that the level that is being proposed at 5 is satisfactory. Bearing in mind also that there are opportunities to park coach parking elsewhere, and in the addendum, but also in the papers, there are existing overnight coach parking opportunities in Catford, in Beckenham and in Mitcham. The applicant has been talking to those, the people who manage those sites, and there are opportunities to do that. The coach management plan will look at, first of all, how people do drop off, and then how they go and have an overnight stay elsewhere. But we feel that the times when the amount of coach parking will be 5 will be fairly limited anyway. And if the hotel is moving in the direction that it wants to move in, it actually is possible that its patronage might be more from people coming by public transport or by car rather than by coach. So we don't feel it's sustainable to completely fill up the whole of the site with coaches. And in many hotels in London, it's not a sustainable approach to fill up or to put coaches close by. And I think the other thing is that because of its historic links, and there are concerns around how a lot of coach parking might actually impact detrimentally on the character of the building and how the building presents itself onto the street. So we feel that they've got the level of on-site coach parking just about right. Now, the issues, Richard, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. Yeah. In terms of the minibus approach, it is a good point in terms of people might misuse the minibus and park their cars elsewhere and use that approach. I think the hotel is seeking to, and maybe they can give some commentary when they present, but they are looking very much at controlling the way in which people come and go into the hotel through their website. And as part of the stay, you will then be able to book a parking space on site. You might be able to book an arrangement to actually use the minibus, but I think there will be a very much clear understanding of how that minibus is being used. And I think it's important that that use of that minibus is restricted to only picking up people from public transport modes, rather than, in a residential street 200 yards away. So I think we will want to make sure that that works and operates effectively rather than it being misused. I don't think it's in anybody's interest, not especially the hotels, to actually seek to do something that is to the detriment of something that they're seeking to work very hard to not have a problem with. Thank you.
Chair, just coming back on the car parking issue, which I don't think was covered. So when people make the booking, and this will be secured in the travel plan, which is secured as a condition, people will have the option to actually book a car parking space and pay for it before they actually arrive. And there'll be clear messages on that site, on the website, about the issue in the area and the lack of on-street available parking that will be in place. There's also the contribution towards CPZ consultation and potential implementation. I appreciate controlled parking zones are controversial, but that money is there. And when we move forward in the future, there will be an opportunity to have a consultation, and people can actually make a decision about whether they want that extra protection.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perry, then Councillor Fraser.
Thank you very much. Picking up on the coach element again, really. We've got 5 spaces being proposed, and TfL think, or the London plan, think that 10 to 11 is what would be the appropriate level. It goes on about the management plan saying that parking after drop-off would be in Mitcham, Camberwell and Stockwell, which are not that close by. But with the increase in numbers coming and increasing coaches coming, when coach number 6 turns up, what's going to happen? What's the reality of coach number 6? Is it going to just park on the road outside and everybody jump off, and or is it going to circle around the local roads, or is it going to park up in Stockwell for an hour? What is the actual reality of too many coaches?
Okay, just a couple of points on that. So obviously we've got the London Plan standards that say 10 to 11 coach parking spaces. The applicant's done a lot of work around trip generation, about how people will travel. So the estimate there, based on that work, is that up to 7 coaches may be required during the day, not all at the same time, but during a typical day. Now, as part of the coach parking management plan, a key part of that will be a pre-booking system, so that coaches will need to book that space. So the hotel are completely clear about when the coaches are coming, and they can phase arrival and departures. Also, just a point about some local coach companies that may use it do have their own parking facilities on their own sites as well.
Councillor Fraser.
Just to explore issues about transport a bit further. I note in para 961 the site has a public transport accessibility rating of 3, which is moderate. I've already heard mention the fact that it's 5 minutes walk from the district centre. But how far would it be in walking distance from the nearest train station and overground station, Crystal Palace?
I think from memory, it's, if you, based on the sort of PTEL assessment and how and walking speeds that are included in that assessment, I think it's 11 to 12 minutes.
I think you'll be walking quite fast for that. Is there any bus transport connections between the site and Crystal Palace train station?
Councillor, could you turn your microphone off? Thank you.
I understand there are. I don't have the details here to hand.
And in terms of the next closest train station, Norwood Junction, can you confirm that there's no public transport or bus connection between Norwood Junction and the station? The reason I mention it, I think it's an issue around why people travel here by motor vehicle as opposed to other means, and I'm just trying to get at that. My second set of questions really go on some of the accommodation being provided, and in the table under 9.4, I see there's an increase in the number of rooms who have no windows or with light wells only. The current occupation rate has 12% rooms, that's 1 in 8 with no windows. That increases certainly in the new build, and if you look in total, in terms of the total occupancy, it would seem to be a figure of 22% with either no windows or light and light wells. Maybe it's more a question to the applicant to think, but how attractive is that as an offer to visitors? Certainly, if I think today, if I was offered a hotel bedroom without any light, I would walk out. And I'm not quite sure how attractive that is, and how that is, for visitors come to Croydon the first time, whether that's attractive. And that links back into the question I've got on 9.4, is about current occupancy rates. And it says it's 85%. Just to check how that was calculated.
Chair, if I may, Councillor, this is you're relatively new to the committee. This debate and the discussion around windowless rooms and light wells has been discussed before on a previous scheme that was presented by the same applicant. In London Road, and members or the members of that committee will be aware that we've inspected windowless rooms. There are existing windowless rooms within the existing hotel, and I've been led to believe that they are very popular. And in many ways, it's and it's surprisingly, in terms of how people might want to stay within this hotel. It's very much an opportunity. It is a bedroom rather than somewhere to spend a lot of time in. But it is surprisingly pleasant in terms of its space, and the lighting's very good, and the furniture's very good, and the fixtures and fittings are very good. So this, we were satisfied with that. And at the end of the day, in terms of planning standards for hotel rooms, there is no specific requirement for hotel bedrooms to have windows. There's many situations in central London that have similar arrangements. In terms of the occupancy rate, that was something that, we haven't carried out that survey ourselves. It's something that has been put to us by the applicant in terms of their own survey data. So that's something that's come from the applicant.
I think it is just worth saying that there was a site visit on that other hotel, and members of the committee did go and have a look at windowless rooms, and actually then subsequently all supported, if I recall correctly, the application when it then came back to committee. They were content that actually that kind of accommodation worked perfectly well. Councillor Fraser.
And could demonstrate to me where the actual windowless rooms are, and there's windows with restricted lighting.
Pete, don't get your microphone.
The windowless rooms are mostly on, clearly as the site slopes down, they're in the sort of basement one along the sort of upper part of the east-west spine road, as well as the rooms, these rooms that are at basement one level beneath the, at the lower level of the southwest end block. As you can see, there are proposals for light wells on this side, and similarly there are some light wells on this side as well, but they're at that level. There are existing windowless rooms within the existing 70s block as well, and they're the I'm trying to remember where they were now. I think they're in this vicinity here, where there are some lower level rooms that don't benefit from windows. But as I say, as you've heard, that there have been site visits, and we have, the scheme in London Road had a similar arrangements that this committee found acceptable.
Okay, Councillor Brew.
Still not. So sorry. Reverting to the subject of coach parking briefly. In fact, that picture on the left right now. It looks, the site of 5 coaches viewed from, I think you said the road to the left was called Fitzroy Gardens. It looks awfully stark. I mean, if this scheme were to go ahead, I'd like to see a lot more screening to the west of the site so that the coaches will be much better hidden, or indeed hidden at all, as compared with the way they appear to be right now.
Well, as you can see, there's an existing landscape. The existing street is landscaped on the corner, and there are proposals to significantly enhance the frontage onto Church Road. There may be some further opportunities for additional landscaping and some hedge planting, maybe alongside that elevation. Or that frontage. I don't see any reason why that can't take place. We obviously need to make sure that there's sufficient space with planting for the coaches to be placed there, because of the importance of tracking and making sure that they can manoeuvre safely within the forecourt.
Okay, so Councillor Clark.
Apologies, Chair. A couple of questions, and indulge me if you will, because I'm also a new member to this committee, although I have been on a planning committee before. So you made reference earlier to a number of pro forma letters that had been received, and I didn't quite catch the numbers that you were talking about. Could you give an indication of when those were received, if there was any shift in the level of support or objection, and the extent to which this committee should be taking the numbers into account as opposed to the content of those pro formas?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, my report was finalised about a week and a half ago, and probably around sort of 5 days before that, I started getting sort of regular sort of letters coming in through the post, and they were, and those letters were supporting the scheme. The vast majority were pro forma letters, and as I've said in the addendum, and it's stated in the addendum before you, because my report talks about 70 letters of objection. It's now, as I say, I've now since then it went up by a further 500 and something.
Pete,
so,
was that support or objection?
And that's of supporting the scheme. More recently, and it was probably about 3 days ago, I then had, I think it was around 40 letters of objection. Again, standard pro forma letters purported to be from local businesses, and the addresses of those businesses were mentioned in the pro forma. So it didn't come directly from them, but that was how it is. Now, pro forma letters, you know, I mean, I feel that before all that happened, I had some very well-considered comments from local residents and from businesses, both in support or objection. And I'd like to think that those, I mean, you could write a book on the comments, to be honest, but hopefully I've summarised them, and I've given, and there was no new issues that came forward, to be honest. And I think it's been a good process in terms of understanding where people stand on the, and as I say, it's a controversial application, and there's some positives in my view, but there's also things that people feel strongly about. Now, and this committee's talked before around the amount of comment, whether in support or in objection. And to my mind as a planner, if you get one golden nugget that says this is not good or this is problematic because of X, Y and Z, and it hits the nail on planning considerations, that trumps 1,000 letters talking about something that's a bit wishy-washy and doesn't really go to the nub of something. So what I'm basically trying to say is that it's not number, it's quality. It's been a good process. We've got some good considered comments on both sides, I feel, and hopefully I've summarised those well, and I've brought those out into why I feel quite strongly as the presenting officer that this should be, this is satisfactory. We've got the balance right in terms of a satisfactory recommendation to grant planning permission.
So just to summarise that, the fact that there might be more letters in support as opposed to an objection is not a material planning consideration. It is purely the matters that were raised in them that have now been considered by the officers in their report.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Letts.
Just very briefly, if I can ask the officer, I can't really understand why businesses are objecting, because if this goes ahead, there'll be more jobs and more money locally, and that can be spent in the businesses. What percentage of the businesses actually sent letters of objection?
I don't think I'm really in a position or able to answer that, because they've all come in at once and I've had no real understanding. It's all been a bit crazy, to be honest, in terms of managing the process. And, because we've had to log them all and scan them all in and everything else. And in many ways, I feel I've got to where I needed to get to before we had it all. So, no, I don't know where they've come from. I mean, there are, I'd much rather have something that's a bit more bespoke than a pro forma letter.
It's not a referendum at the end of the day. That's the thing, isn't it? I mean, we don't normally map these kind of things, I think, generally anyway. I mean, for example, objection letters generally, or letters for support, typically we wouldn't map them for any application. I think I'm right in saying, so very often if you do look at the objections, you'll get some of them from sort of SW17 or from all over the place, Perth in Australia or whatever. It's not mapped and it's not looked at from that sort of perspective. We don't get very many from Perth, I believe, so to be totally honest about it. Okay, are there any further questions, Councillor Clark? Well, then we are going to move on to, we've got 3 people wishing to address us. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple of further questions. I walked past this site the other day because I was at the Crystal Palace Book Festival, and it happened to draw my eye in respect of knowing that it was in these papers as well. You referred in showing the pictures of the site to the heritage building to the side. I think it's part of the wider structure. It is acknowledged as a listed building. Or locally listed building, let's clarify that. And I was just wondering whether consideration had been or could be given to retaining that structure to the side of the building.
I mean, in response to that, it's for this committee to consider the application before it, and that retention of that is not part of the application. And I think the other worthy consideration of that is, in fact, there is a previous 2014 planning permit, or 2000, which has also agreed the loss of that. So we felt the approach and looking at the way in which it looks much more comprehensively at a solution was a much better approach.
And I have one more, which is just about the principle of basement excavation around this site. So, I mean, forgive me, I'm not a construction expert, but I'm intrigued as to how the risk of subsidence to nearby buildings has been assessed and will be mitigated, and whether there are any concerns about the River Effra underneath.
Right, well, I'm also not a structural engineer either. But we did require, as part of this application, a basement excavation sort of strategy. That's a phase one strategy to look at the principle of how one might do this. And that's clearly needs to be further considered. But, I mean, we did discuss this in general terms with our colleagues in building control, who felt that it was a good first stab at how best to do it. There was a lot of work done around pulling the basement away from immediate boundaries in particular, so that risk of subsidence, I mean, clearly there need to be very strong retaining walls and to retain the... but we were satisfied, and our colleagues were, that it was a good first stab. But clearly there's conditions recommended where further work will need to be done as part of that.
Is that, though, a primarily building control matter as opposed to a planning matter?
It is primarily a building control point. Issues of substance is a planning consideration, but it's very much focused and working closely with building control.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, right, we have a number of people wishing to address us. Firstly, we have Mr. King, who is an objector. Councillor O'Connell as well, yes. Both those gentlemen are speaking as objectors. We also have Mr. Quelch and Ms. Kens as well, who are speaking as the applicant agent, and Councillor Ryan, who is speaking as local ward councillor. So if we could hear from the objectors first, and then we'll hear from the supporters. Gentlemen, have you decided between you how much time you've got each? And do you wish us to time keep for you, or are you going to self-regulate? Okay, fine. So when you're ready, please.
Okay, I'm speaking on behalf of residents of Fitzroy and Wakefield Gardens and the 300 local predominantly SE19 objectors to this scheme. I live in Fitzroy Gardens. I actually live in the cul-de-sac on the pictures. I'm one of the closest to the hotel. Straight away, I would like to stress that we are not opposed to development here, certainly not renovation. We are simply opposed to overdevelopment. Forgive me if I look weary. For 2.5 years now, we've been inundated with numerous applications from the hotel. Throughout, we've been trying to demonstrate that expansion on this scale is simply not appropriate for this site. It's been a long, tiring struggle to make our voices heard, and the resources and funds available to us as residents are far outweighed by those at the applicant's disposal. The process has been going on for so long, it's testament to the fact that this expansion is more than just challenging, as it is often described. It simply does not fit, almost literally or architecturally, in its location. Crystal Palace isn't home to an international airport, large music venue or next to Big Ben, so why does SE19 need a hotel that's bigger than the Park Lane Hilton? Football fans are day trippers. The new Selhurst Park will only host matches once a fortnight. In trying to shoehorn a hotel of this size into a compact residential neighbourhood, developers have been under pressure to fulfil a client brief. In order to squeeze in the number of desired rooms, a very high proportion, I think something like a quarter, are underground or either completely or partially windowless. They've ended up with this unremarkable pedestrian slab of a building, a development which surely only the most optimistic could ever describe as enhancing or even preserving the conservation area in which it sits. We also doubt the potential of this proposed hotel to perform as is claimed. We're concerned about our future landscape will be blighted by an unsustainable giant white elephant. Business owners and developers can move on, but neighbours' lives are impacted forever. Last year, an almost identical scheme was refused by those seated where you are now. It was described as appalling and indefensible. Two Labour councillors, Wayne Trackers-Lawler and Jamie Audsley, voted for refusal, referring to residents as reasonable people with reasonable objections and requesting that a new scheme, a more caring and thoughtful one, be forthcoming. Sadly, that's not been the case. We're enormously disappointed to see this second scheme, in which, crucially, nothing significant has changed. The partial reduction of 2 separate stories out of 9 total accommodation levels has made little real difference. The vast footprint remains almost the same. Local infrastructure simply was not designed to cope with a hotel of this scale. Overdevelopment issues have not been addressed. You will have received a letter informing you of our objections, too many to detail in this time slot. Many of you are coming to this issue possibly fresh. Some of you may not fully know Crystal Palace and its unique character and sense of community. If there is any doubt in your minds that this overdevelopment might not be the positive addition that some are claiming, we urge you to prioritise Croydon residents over Croydon politics. This scheme has failed to address the material planning considerations that were grounds for the previous refusal. We ask you to insist on a revised scheme which is not overdevelopment and which addresses properly the requirement to preserve or enhance the conservation area.
Thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me to speak as an objector. It takes a scheme of kind of epic proportions to bring together cross-party agreement, and I'm very proud to speak against it as a London Assembly member and in support of Dr Fiona Twycross, also a Labour London Assembly member. This is a scheme that you've seen before. It has, if agreed, this will have a detrimental effect on local residents that is almost impossible to overstate. I admire the lengthy, almost eulogy from the planning officer on this to defend what I think is the indefensible. This is a scheme that's come back that is pretty much the same as the one before. And I think the images that you saw earlier were very difficult, really almost to separate. This is a scheme that is the size of a hotel that you'd probably expect next to Heathrow Airport. It's still got 500 rooms, best part. This is a district centre. Crystal Palace up and north is a delightful district centre. It does not lend itself to a hotel of this size. You've heard about the issues around parking and particularly around the coaches. This is going to be a 24-hour operation with coaches and people coming to that place. Parking, they will have to pay for their parking, remember, parking on-street parking. The residents there are already suffering from considerable parking issues. This can only worsen it to a massive degree. We've heard about significant number of letters. We know full well, I come to this committee before citing hundreds possibly of objectors to be told that is not a particular issue. Equally around, interestingly, about businesses locally. We've had applications before where we've said this will help businesses locally. That is not a planning reason, whether it helps them or not. So that is something I would ask you not to consider. What I would ask you to consider is the fact that this is an unacceptably large development.
Councillor O'Connell, I'm afraid your time is up.
As the last
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. We now have, if gentlemen have just spoken, if you could vacate the seats, please. And we have Mr. Quelch and Ms. Carnes, who are addressing us as supporters. You also have up to 5 minutes to speak. Have you agreed between you how you're going to split your time?
Yeah, I'm going to do most of the talking, and Katie from the SAL will probably may be able to answer some of the questions that have been raised or queries.
Okay, fine. We won't be addressing any further questions to you directly. It should be up to you to pick up any points you wish to make in your time. Okay.
So I'm Richard Quelch from GVA. We're the planning consultant that's been working on the previous application and the current application, and Katie is from Massail. She's the architect that's been working on the scheme. So firstly, we wanted to reiterate to the committee our client's aspirations in terms of the Queen's Hotel. As officers have mentioned, the site is currently of its time and the hotel needs refurbishing. And so the aspirations are to provide a better quality of accommodation, and that's what's behind these proposals. We're targeting the hotel as a 4-star hotel, and the client is in advanced discussions with Best Western about branding the hotel as a Best Western. This is part of a strategic programme of similar upgrade refurbishments that the client's taking across London, and the Queen's Hotel has been identified as part of this. The applicant has also delivered a scheme recently in the last couple of years in Thornton Heath, which is again a new Best Western hotel that's a 4-star and currently has a TripAdvisor excellent rating, which demonstrates the quality that they're trying to achieve with these refurbishment and new hotel programmes. So in summary, some of the benefits that the scheme will deliver include an improved standard of hotel accommodation, which I've mentioned. Interestingly, in our discussions with some of the tour operators, including higher-end tour operators like Kuoni, they've been saying that currently they wouldn't be willing to use the hotel because of the quality of accommodation. But with the new scheme, with the better standard of accommodation, that's something that they'd be looking to potentially use in the future. The hotel would deliver an estimated 165 jobs at London Living Wage. There's also been touched on estimated annual spending capacity for the local economy to support local businesses, and I'll explain the rationale behind that calculation. And also CIL and Section 106 payments totalling circa £2.1 million to be spent on local infrastructure. To enable these benefits to be delivered, the planning application is seeking to deliver an uplift of the 161 rooms compared to what's currently on the site that officers referred to. As has already been mentioned, we've worked hard with officers and the previous planning committee in order to try and resolve the 2 reasons for refusal that were put forward last time, and that included the pre-application development presentation. We've also undertaken further consultation with local residents, which included 2 public exhibition dates. And what is also happening at the moment is that the applicant is has already undertaken a residents forum to talk about the existing operational nature of the hotel, and has a programme for doing that in every 6 months moving forward. Maybe I'll touch now on some of the points that were raised or mentioned by committee members. So in terms of the spending capacity that was identified, the £2.3 million, that is based on a calculation which takes into account average hotel occupancy across London, average room occupancy, average daily spend based on TripAdvisor information, and estimated spend in the local area. So there's a calculation that you put that information into based on the number of rooms, and it gives you an estimate of what is likely to be spent in the area. In terms of coach parking, there's been a mention about the management programme that would be in place. The intention is that coach operators would ring in advance and contact the hotel. There are 5 spaces, and the intention is that obviously the arrival of the coaches would be staggered, so you would not have more than 5 coaches at any one time. And if there were, the coach at the hotel would manage that process and ensure that didn't take place. In the event that it did take place, those additional coaches, or a coach that is currently on site, would be moved to one of the 3 locations mentioned by officers outside of the site. Currently, also, the council, there's no control in terms of coach parking on the site that the council has. This planning application would give the council the ability to control coach parking. In terms of car parking itself, the current parking level is 0.18 spaces per room. There's obviously quite a significant increase to 0.42 spaces per room, which is a response to the reasons for refusal, and also local residents' comments about their concerns about car parking in the area. What we've also done is we've introduced, there's been lots of concerns from the local community about van parking in the area, parking on street. So we've introduced 13 van spaces on site, all of which are free.
I'm afraid your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, and then finally we've got Councillor Ryan, who's one of the local ward councillors. Councillor, when you're ready, please.
Members of the committee, I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you this evening, but I wish the circumstances would have been different. I refer this application jointly with the previous ward member for the area because of the growing concern that I and members of the community have about those proposals. The application tonight is not new. We have been here before and very little has changed. The size and scale of the building has been reduced, yes. That is true, but not enough. Never before in all my years as a local councillor have I known a planned application to arouse such strong feelings in the community. Why are there such strong feelings? Simply writing off residents' concerns and NIMPism is totally ignoring serious issues that are presented to us this evening. Parking has been a problem here for many years, and I am saddened that the report put before us does not acknowledge that, but insisting that patrons pay to use the hotel car park. This will not only encourage people to use residential parking, it will guarantee it, causing further misery. This is a serious material planning consideration and cannot be ignored. The subterranean accommodation and parking that is planned is certain to impact on the ecology of the area, not to mention the foundation of local homes. Where is the reassurances in the report to this country? There are no reassurances. Where is the report on consultation with local businesses? We have heard so much about regeneration, but local traders have yet to see their business benefit, and there have already been a number of expansions and lots of profits made by this hotel. The quality of the accommodation, certainly at subterranean levels, is questionable, not to mention the obvious health and safety risks associated. The footprint remains almost exactly the same as before. Many rooms are still underground, and there are still many rooms without windows. And despite the scale, customers will be crammed in. The actual reduction in the number of rooms from last year's refusal scheme is just 6%. I also draw the committee's attention to the unprecedented number of objections from local residents who do not share the enthusiasm expected regeneration that officers hoped will bring. I note that a business impact survey was not carried out by the Council, and it is clear to see why. There has already been a number of expansions to the hotel over the years, and this has not helped regenerate the area one bit. Why are we not saying that we do not want any development, but we are calling for sensible development, sensitive development? I want to address the consultation, which was limited in its scope and outreach, namely Fox Hill and roads further down Church Road, like Highfield Hill, Turkey Oak Close, Hemlin Gardens, and representatives were unable to address the basic question about these plans. The Council has allowed the developer the full, very basic of consultation and not to do what we all wanted, and that was for the hotel developer to go that extra mile. I also ask that those representatives from the hotel please do not misunderstand local opinion. The local community wants to work with you to make the Queen's Hotel a jewel in the Crystal Palace crown. We want to enter into meaningful dialogue and not to be threatened by having the heart of the community ripped out. It is time to put the people before profits. I ask this committee to think long and hard, and I ask you to refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ryan. Councillor Ryan, would you mind just turning off your microphone?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
Lovely. Thanks, Pat. Cheers. OK, do the officers have anything further they wish to add?
Thank you, Chair. There's been quite a lot of discussion regarding this application tonight so far, so I will try and keep it brief. Pete Smith has already given a very detailed officer presentation on the acceptability of this scheme. I think it's worth just taking us back to one of the things he said early on in his presentation is, whilst members tonight are here to consider the application as a whole, it is important to be mindful of the previous decision in relation to the earlier application on this site. That raised two refusal reasons, which are detailed in paragraph 3.2 of your report. As we've heard this evening, one of those was the concerns regarding overdevelopment of the proposed extensions and the impact that would have on the Church Road conservation area. There has been a reduction in the bulk and massing and the number of rooms proposed as a result of this application. There have also been changes to the appearance of the development, making it much more sympathetic and elegant, and an improvement in its setting within the conservation area. The second reason was relating to the low levels of public transport in the area and concerns about inadequate on-site parking facilities. Obviously, we've also heard that that level of parking has been increased. And actually, with this application, there are conditions regarding a travel plan and car park management plan, which brings those details within the control of the local planning authority, which they're not at the moment, due to the age of the hotel. Just coming on to the ward councillors' concerns then regarding consultation. In terms of the council's consultation, we followed our procedures in terms of notifying those who joined the site, but in addition to that, because of the scale of this development, we also erected site notices within the vicinity of the site. I think it's clear from the number of representations that we've received that local businesses and residents were more than aware of this application and have had their opportunity to make their concerns or supportive comments known to officers and to the members of the committee. As officers, we believe the applicant has sought to overcome those previous concerns, and we recommend approval.
Thank you. OK, I'll open this to the committee. I'm happy to go Councillor Perry, then I'll come in myself, then Councillor Roche.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Obviously, we've had a very detailed report tonight and a very detailed discussion around this application. I appreciate that the scheme on many levels looks better, but I'm not convinced that the impact has actually been reduced of the scheme. And in my opinion, the impact from the gardens actually looked to be greater on this revised scheme than on the previous scheme that was already refused. And I don't think the buildings lose themselves as they go down the hill. I think they're still very prominent as they go down the hill, and I think the impact on Fitzroy Gardens will be huge. For me, it's clearly an over-intensification of the site. We've heard that the hotel would be as big as a hotel next to Heathrow Airport. For me, that's clearly an over-intensification, and it's an overdevelopment of the site, which is going to have a huge impact on those adjoining occupiers that live nearby. I think on the transport issues, again, I think whilst things have been tweaked, I don't think enough has changed to really make a difference to this scheme. I think there's still huge concerns around parking and the charging for parking and the impact of pushing that onto local streets. And I think also the issue with coaches still remain, and the reality of whether 5 coach spaces is actually suitable or enough for the level of people that could be coming to the hotel. So whilst I appreciate that there have been some changes, and I appreciate the desire of the hotel to improve, the owners of the hotel to improve the facilities, it just, I think, is too much for this particular site. And the proposal is simply too big, and it doesn't sufficiently address the previous concerns that this committee raised. So I would therefore move refusal as per paragraph 3.2 of this report, because I do not feel that those issues have been addressed. Thank you.
OK, thank you. I'll come in myself. Clearly, there's been a large hotel here for many, many years, and indeed there was a large hotel built as Crystal Palace first developed, as the park and the Crystal Palace building were developed, or well, relocated in the 1850s. And the size of the hotel here at the moment, 334 rooms, I think it is already a very big hotel. But it is a hotel that has reduced in quality and has been had a very negative impact in terms of some of the changes that have been made over more recent years, in particular the 1970s elements with the building that looks something more like it would sort of come out of a sort of relatively cheap resort somewhere in the Mediterranean, rather than something that's sitting in a conservation area. And also then there's the canopies as well, which are also very negative to the look of the existing building. We've also heard that there have been a number of applications already been granted for this. So the extension essentially to the side where the original wing has burnt down, I believe it was, has already been consented. So that's a significant change that's already happened. The size of the hotel at the moment, just based on the sort of figures in terms of 10 or 11 coach parking spaces at the moment, would presumably have 7 or 8 coach spaces if it was actually regulated in any way. But there is no regulation for that at the moment. There is a modest amount of car parking provided at present as well, which is inadequate. The scheme that we see before us improves significantly on the previous application in terms of extra provision of parking, but also I think particularly the free van parking, which is important, and the control that would be given and put into place over the coaches as well, which is also really important. For me, though, one of the the other changes in terms of the impact on the gardens to the rear, it is very clear from the images that we've seen this evening that the impact would be significantly reduced as a result of the changes that have been made. A number of floors have been taken off. The element of the east-west block that is next to the houses is now the same height as the houses. And also the design has been modified in such a way that the individual pieces are similar in scale to the pieces that already exist around parts of that around parts of the garden. So there's not going to be a significant and negative impact on those gardens as a result of this. What this scheme will do, though, is bring a massive regeneration impact, not only to Crystal Palace itself, but also to other surrounding areas, including South Norwood, for example, bringing many jobs and customers to local cafes, pubs and restaurants. That cannot be questioned in any way whatsoever. Also, the improvement in the... I know they don't typically use star ratings as much anymore, but the upgrade in this hotel will also mean that the customers, and the increased number of customers staying in the hotel, will have more available cash to spend in the immediate local area. I suspect that's why so many local businesses have been keen to support the application. We've heard, and some concerns have been raised about the bedrooms without windows. And I have to say, my immediate sort of response to that is, well, that doesn't sound great. But actually, if you look at most, in fact, I think probably all modern cruise ships, for example, at least half of the bedrooms in those are fully internal bedrooms. Have a look at the design and layout of modern cruise ships next time you're on the internet, because the situation is very similar. It's when people are basically staying in a room and are interested in sleeping in it rather than spending that much time in it, because they'd rather be out, either in the public areas or out in the local economy, spending some of their money in supporting local businesses and creating local jobs. So I think, all in all, this proposed scheme is good for heritage, it's good for the economy, it's good for employment, It's good in regards to the upgrade and the quality of the hotel. It's good for access for all. It's good for tourism in the tourism industry more widely in London. And the impacts on local neighbours will be minimal and actually will probably improve the situation with regarding parking, the free van parking and the proper management of the coaches. So I very much support the application and move the officer's recommendation for approval. Councillor Roche, then Councillor Letts.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to start saying I do welcome investment in Crystal Palace, but not to this scale. The Queen's Hotel was built in 1860 when the high demand was required for the Crystal Palace exhibition. There is a need, but not to this scale. It's almost 50% increase with 161 increase in rooms, which is just too vast for the area. This scheme is bigger than some of the central London hotels. And also, to put on top of that, they're charging for parking, which already is an issue in Crystal Palace, with people staying in the hotel not wanting to pay the fee. So they're parking inappropriately around the area, causing access issues for the pedestrians and also for other vehicles. I'm worried about the impact it will have on the Victorian buildings at the rear of the hotel, especially on Fitzroy and Wakefield Gardens. I'm also concerned about the increase in local air pollution. As a result of the increased amount of cars and coaches that will be coming to the hotel. Coach access will likely cause problems on Church Road, especially when you're going towards the Norwood Triangle, which is already congested in rush hours. The amendment since the previous scheme is not enough, in my view. The scheme is too vast and would impact the surrounding occupants and green spaces. I appreciate the amendments that have been made to the scheme and that it's more sympathetic to the style and heritage of the building, but again, it's too vast. The impact in Regency Gardens and in the modified proposal is just too big. I understand that the hotel needs improvement, but with current occupancy apparently being 80 to 85%, I don't feel the need for or justification to increase the size of the hotel to this scale. I'm not comfortable with the implications of the scheme will have on local area and heritage of this hotel, so I support the motion for refusal.
Councillor, are you seconding refusal?
I second the motion, sorry.
No, that's fine. Councillor Letts.
Thank you very much, Chair. You've actually said much of what I was going to say, but this building is old. 1854, I think it opened, and it's a tired building, and it's an out-of-date building. It's not fit for purpose. So it is part of the local heritage, and it is, as I think Pat Ryan said, a jewel in the crown of the area. But having said all of that, if this investment, if this planning doesn't go ahead and this investment doesn't happen, what's going to, the guys who run the hotel and the girls who run the hotel, they're there to make money because that's what business is all about. But they won't make money, they won't sell rooms, they won't sell events if it's not an up-to-date business and hotel. Now, it has had many planning applications, and many of them were agreed, and there's been add-ons over the years. So I'm very, very proud of this hotel. And the first time I heard of it, I'm an old woman, so Chairman, do give me just a second. First time I heard of the Queen's Hotel was when I was a student nurse at Guy's, and we learnt that Florence Nightingale had stayed at the Queen's Hotel in Crystal Palace. I didn't know where Crystal Palace was, but it's got a great history. So therefore, I would like to second recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Can I see anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Fraser and Councillor Attlee.
I've got concerns about this scheme, and I don't want it to, and I'm not going to treat this as a party political thing, because I think it is about the quality of the scheme coming forward. I used to be the councillor for the former South Norwood, and I was aware this hotel was a problem for local residents in terms of car parking issues, ongoing issues consistently about this. I do understand the need for investment in this hotel and the need to bring this site into more quality use. But I would stress the quality as opposed to the quantity. This site is not the best located site for a hotel. There is an existing hotel on that site, but the intensification of the use isn't, in my view, supported by public transport access. It is some distance from the nearest station. It is not particularly well served by bus services, and it's, the arrangement suggested to address it in terms of a pickup service from East Croydon does actually indicate there's issues there already. And I'm not quite sure what market this hotel currently addresses. It's picking people up from East Croydon. This hotel would seem to be, future, be gearing to serve the central London visitor market, and it's a little bit way out for that. I think there's an argument to say that there should be a quality investment in this site, and you could do that with lower scale development. I would point out that the developers have got consent and have technically implemented the 2014 permission, but they haven't built it out in reality. I am looking at the heights of the buildings and how they impact on the surrounding streets. And again, if I was living there, I would be concerned about how that impacts on me and how it impacts on my neighbours. So I'm minded to support refusal on the grounds previously given, because I don't think they've been adequately addressed. And that's my view, unfortunately.
Okay, Councillor Ali.
So when I look at this application, I see the positive things on the local economy, the 165 jobs paying London living wage, which I think is a great achievement. The Section 106 contribution of £2.1 million in local economy and improving the local area. Also, the upgraded facility and the hotel itself. These are all quite positive and significant contributions which you cannot ignore. On the other side, I see the impact on the sort of local residents in terms of the parking issue, which we have addressed, I think, for more than an hour today. And I think I'm minded to support the application. With the only addition I would like to add is the view to strengthen the planning obligation with regards to the coach parking management plan and the car parking management plan. Especially, I mean, I'll leave it to the officers to see how they think they can strengthen that. But my only sort of relevant contribution to that is to consider the TfL point about it and the London plan point about it, to raise the number of coach parking spaces by reducing the parking spaces for cars, and also to understand more about how that impacts on making it easier or better for local people to reduce the impact on them in terms of a car parked outside on the streets. So I think we need to look into that and strengthen that a bit more.
Mr. Smith, did you want to come back on that point?
Yes, all those matters are sort of covered by the conditions, the recommended conditions. I think in terms of the, I mean, there might be further options to accommodate further coaching, but I think what's important around coach parking in the frontage is we need to make sure that it's safe for pedestrians as well to enter. And, part of the benefit of this scheme is actually to separate out cars and pedestrians so that people can safely enter the hotel. So I think it might be difficult to accommodate further coach parking on site. But I think what we need to work very hard as part of the coach management plan is the overnight parking arrangements. It's been very much on our agenda with the applicant, and I think further work that's where we need to focus our attention, linked to the booking arrangements of the coaches.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn and then Councillor Clark.
I'm minded to approve the application because for a few reasons. Firstly, it is an amazing building, and as people have said, it's a jewel in the crown of Crystal Palace. And my concern is if this work isn't done, it will turn into a failing hotel and it'll end up being derelict, and then we'll actually lose that jewel. And, I actually live quite near there, so I do care about this issue. One of the concerns I've got is parking and the fact that people do have to pay to park. And that worries me that people might just start parking on the street, which is obviously going to be an issue for local residents. But I've also got a query about the employment opportunities offered by the hotel, because I've heard a couple of different figures about it being 100 jobs, like 170 jobs. Will those be permanent jobs for people working within the hotel, or will they be just construction workers who will work there temporarily? And also, will those opportunities be open towards local people, or will they be agency workers being brought in from outside? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mr Smith, are you able to respond to those?
Yes, and maybe Richard can join me as well. In terms of the, so when the previous scheme was considered by this committee, there was a lot of debate around should one reasonably charge for parking or not, and what will the impact of that parking charge be. And I think in many hotels across the country, particularly in areas that are, in urban areas, people want to have the opportunity to park and to park safely within the hotel. And as part of that approach, you should expect to charge. So I think, whilst I appreciate you may feel that that might prevent people from parking, I think it will probably encourage people to pay. Talking at the moment, they're suggesting £5 per night. And I think the other issue with this particular site is the opportunity for on-site car parking is pretty limited. So if you want to walk quite a distance to get to your car, I'd rather like the convenience of parking on site. So I think your concerns and your worries might not necessarily be well-founded. The other point was around employment and training and employment opportunities for local people is very important. That's why we have our guidance around ensuring that local people do get first dibs at jobs. We have a local job brokerage within the council that money would go towards to help make sure that the council can manage that and work with the developer to make sure that local people get trained to get the opportunity for the jobs during the construction phase as well as the end-use phase. So we're satisfied that that will happen.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I think this has been quite a good debate, and understandably and necessarily a protracted one. And I find myself really, honestly, in two minds, which demonstrates the open-mindedness that I'm sure we all bring to these discussions today. I've heard a number of things that have moved me in both directions. So, to articulate some of those, I mean, in terms of the design, I think what is proposed on site now is considerably better in terms of its appearance than the previous scheme. I think that in terms of longer term preserving the heritage of the hotel building as it is, just making it viable has to be a good thing. Improving the access, the accessibility of the facilities that are in the hotel as it stands, again, has to be a good thing. And I'm profoundly unconvinced by the argument that that's been made about the impact on the green spaces. We've seen on the screen images that do not convince me that there's an impact there. However, having said that, I'm also moved by the representations that have been made from objectors about the impact on the character, and by my colleague Councillor Fraser, who talked about the lack of transport accessibility, and that's something that I feel particularly strongly about as someone who works for a public transport authority, who doesn't drive, and as I say in my earlier contribution, I visited this site for completely separate reasons earlier in the week, so I've seen it. At this stage, having vacillated somewhat, my own view, looking at the reasons for refusal previously, is that the first one is mitigated to some extent, but that increasing the number of rooms and at the same time not doing enough to mitigate the lack of public transport accessibility means that at this stage I'd be minded to vote to refuse the application.
Okay, do I see anybody else wishing to speak? No? Okay then. Well, we've got two motions completed before us. We've got move for refusal, moved by Councillor Perry and seconded by Councillor Roche, essentially for the same reasons as refused previously. And then we've got move for approval, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Letts. So we'll take the first of those first. Move for refusal. Can I see those in favour of refusal?
6.
And those against?
4.
So that... So that is refused, and the second motion for approval falls. Okay, thank you. I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break before we move on. We do have 4 more applications, though, so if everybody could please be back in their seats in 5 minutes' time, that would be most appreciated. Okay. Is everybody back? Yes. So we'll move on now to item 6.1, 126 Foxley Lane. The presenting officer is Laura Field. Thank you, Laura. When you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the demolition of the existing buildings on the site and the erection of a three-storey building comprising 21 special care residential units and the provision of the associated facilities. This slide shows the outline of the site outlined in red. The site comprises of two properties, so White Lodge here, which is the existing care home, and Woodcote Grove Drive here, which is a residential dwelling. The site is covered by 2 tree preservation orders that cover trees on the site and trees on the boundary here with 128 Foxley Lane. The surrounding area is residential in character, and Peaks Hill here is to the rear. This slide shows the photograph of White Lodge here, which has an in-out driveway here with hard standing on the frontage for cars in association with the existing care facilities. Number 128 Foxley Lane is just here through the trees. The next photographs show the rear of the site here, so the rear of White Lodge here. You can just see the buildings of 128 Foxley Lane here. Again, the TPO trees run along the boundary here. The photograph here shows the site looking towards Woodcote Drive. We're now turning towards Woodcote Drive and number 1 here, which forms part of the site with White Lodge. The photograph here looks from the neighbouring property towards the site here. So number 3 Woodcote Drive, looking towards the site, number 1, and you can just see White Lodge here. This is the site plan of the application before us this evening, showing 128 here. The distance from the flank wall to flank wall is just over 14 metres, and the distance between the other residential property here at number 3 is between 13 and 16 metres here to number 3 Woodcote Drive. Together with the existing trees, the scheme is well separated from the neighbouring properties, and the windows are also carefully placed. There's an in-out driveway here from Foxley Lane to Woodcote Drive, and the 7 car parking spaces with a drop-off zone here and refuse facilities here. There's also a minibus service as well that will run from the site to Purley Town Centre. We consider this to be acceptable. The principle of the site for a care home is also accepted, as the care that's put forward this evening addresses an identified need. As you can see, the TPO trees run along Foxley Lane and the boundary with 128 Foxley Lane, and those will be retained as part of the development. Moving to the elevations of the site. So this is the southern elevation, so the front elevation, and the eastern elevation here. So the architectural design is typical of the area, with projecting gables and hipped roofs. The size and massing works well within the large site, and it's broken up by the single-storey element in the middle of the site here. It sits comfortably within the site. Turning to the rear elevation and the western elevation, which faces number 128 Foxley Lane, and continues the design themes of the front elevation. And just note the minimal windows in this elevation, with no windows at first floor level to protect the amenities of the adjoining occupiers. This slide shows the application within the street scene here on Foxley Lane and Woodcote Drive at the top of the slide. The scheme sits well within the plot, and the design respects the character of the area. The photo montage here just shows the site with Woodcote Drive here and Foxley Lane here. It's considered the well-designed and proportioned scheme and would address an identified care need. The recommendation is to grant permission subject to the legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification? Councillor Brew.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in the statement that there is an identified need. Is there an identified need for care homes in general or specifically for neurological care homes? Because I note the restriction says neurological care. And will the patients be drawn from Croydon or farther afield, or how much farther afield, and so on?
So local plan and London plan policy talks about identified local need, and that's the neurological care is the identified local need, so it will be for local residents. It's not. We have an over-provision of general care homes, for example, elderly care. So it's an identified local need.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I have one more. I'm puzzled by the reference to the provision of an electric car space for sharing. How's that going to work?
So there will be a dedicated electric car which will be available to the care home on a pre-booked service. So it's an actual electric car that will be available to the care home.
Like zip cars and so on, but restricted
That's
to
right,
the... I see. Okay.
The care home, yes.
Councillor.
Sorry, it's just it's a follow-on question from, could probably hear me. It's a follow-on question for what Simon Brew asked. Councillor Simon Brew is currently, as I'm aware, the lodge is not currently used specifically for neurological care. Is there any assurance that going forward it will be used for that purpose, or is it still going to be open to care from any sector of society?
Yes, so the identified need for this application is for neurological care, and we have actually put a condition restricting that type of care because that's the identified need.
Can we just be clear, when it says neurological care, what it's talking about predominantly is dementia. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Can we call it that in future reports? Because it actually makes a lot more sense to more people if we actually spell that out, I think.
Sorry, may I come back again? Right, now I know it's dementia care. That changes the... I was thinking it was something different. I mean, places like Sunrise, for example, in central Purley, they have sections for dementia care. So I'm just challenging whether this is... And I know the one in Banstead, by the way, there's another Sunrise in Banstead which has dementia care special area. I'm just challenging whether there really is the need for that much dementia, given, as you were saying earlier, Purley has such an enormous oversupply of conventional old people's homes.
We have had discussions with our internal departments with regards to specialist care, dementia care or neurological care, and it has been assessed, the application, through our internal departments, and there is an identified need for this type of care.
Is it correct to say that's a growing need as well?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Right, we've got a number of people wishing to address us. Mr Frett, who's an objector, and Councillor Kadir, who is a referring ward councillor. So, Mr Frett, you have up to 3 minutes to tell us about your concerns, please, as soon as you're ready. Thank you.
I shall keep it brief. I probably won't need 3 minutes. Purley, I live in Woodcote Drive, and Purley is saturated with care homes. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but to be honest, it's going to impact greatly on the surrounding area in terms of parking, because I just don't think there's enough parking being shown on that map. You can see there's going to be an overspill on Woodcote Drive, therefore it's going to impact on the access road. In fact, opposite number 1, that literally is going to be impacted by this build, we've just had a care home completed. It's been finished about a year ago. So on the end of Woodcote Drive, we've got possibly two care homes just being built in the recent times. I just think it's going to have a detrimental effect on the traffic, and the flow of traffic in and out of Woodcote Drive. In fact, I noticed from the notes as well that planning application has been refused on the existing site, the White Lodge site, before, and all I can see this as being is just a profit-making exercise for that existing owner. So I just do not think this is in fitting what we've currently got in Woodcote Drive, and I just think I'd like to put that. I'd like to think I'll be representing the 9 people that have objected to this on the basis that we just have a saturation of care homes in Purley, and it really doesn't warrant having another one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Councillor Gadir.
Good evening, Chair, and thank you. Obviously, you have the 9 objectors here. One of the objectors is here, and he's said it all I need to say. I echo his all sentiment. There is a massing in this site, and obviously it will have an impact on the parking situation as well. But beyond all this, I am here this evening. I am not against the care home itself, but I strongly feel, as my objector, there are so many care homes in Purley. What we really need is family housing, and it would be a great loss if we lose this family home once again when we need homes. Finally, if you ought to grant this application for this site, what would happen to the present residents there? That's something you need also, Chair, you need to take consideration into. And on all this basis, I strongly recommend the objection of this proposal. Thank you for your listening to me.
Okay, thank you very much. Do officers have anything further they wish to add? Nicola.
Yeah, just very briefly, as a reminder, part of this site is already used as a care home, but that care home doesn't have any restrictions in terms of its current use. So actually, whilst a family home would be lost and the provision of the care home would become wider, it would be for a use which we do have an identified need, and we do need to provide homes and care for a whole range of people throughout their lifetime. So also in policy terms, there is not a policy which is against cumulative impact. It's about need and assessing need, and through the local plan process and with consultation with the experts within the council, this is an area which we do have needs. So this would bring an existing care home that we have into a use that we have a need for.
Okay, thank you. Open this to the committee. I'm happy to Councillor Clark.
I won't take long, Chair. Having heard the representations and having also read the application as presented, I'm convinced that this is an excellent scheme that will deliver employment, much needed employment, and meet an identified need for the area. So I'm going to move the officer's recommendations to support the application and permit.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brew.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move refusal of this application on grounds of saturation of Purley of care homes in general, and even Foxley Lane. And for the record, my mother died in a care home in Foxley Lane, so I have a lot of personal experience of the area. I also extremely concerned about, I know it's not a planning issue, but, you know, where will they find the staff to person yet another care home, because it requires a high proportion of highly skilled and professionally trained staff. And also, I regret the loss of a family home, which, as my colleague, Councillor Kadir, said, the thing Purley needs above all is more family homes, not yet more care homes. Thank you.
Councillor Fraser.
Yes, I'm supporting this scheme. Dementia is a growing phenomenon in our society. All of us at one time will have elderly relatives who develop dementia. It's a good chance some of us sitting around this room eventually develop dementia. And now, while you'll want to keep your family members at home as long as you can, there'll come a time when they won't recognise you and they will need to have care, proper care. So we do need to provide homes for them. The second issue Councillor Brews mentions is really about training and sufficient staff to actually run these homes. And that is an issue. But it's an issue that must be addressed by central government, and they need to take social care and care for the elderly seriously. They need to find funds for these homes, but need to fund the funds for the training and paying the staff at proper wage as well. And that's key. And then, as you know, to play party politics, that's an issue that we need to get and sort out outside this chamber. This application is about addressing a need which I think is apparent, and I will second approval.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Letts.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think to say that there are too many care homes in Purley, this is different. This is a specialist. You have to be a specialist unit, and working with people who have Alzheimer's and dementia, and you know, they are not going to. The thing about parking, I have to tell you, the residents living within the establishment, should it be approved, will not drive cars. And I don't know if anybody around in this chamber have actually lived and had a member of their family suffer from this evil disease. As we all get older, we're all more likely to be affected by this. I have to say it's the loneliest job in the world, being at home with someone who thinks they're 4 or 5 and should be at school when they're in their 80s. So I think this will be a great service to Croydon, because we do not have enough care homes in this particular area of need, and it is a huge need. It's terrible. You might have a woman or a man who's lived in Foxley Lane and badly needs a service. Why should we shunt them out of the borough when they have lived here and this has been their home? And the fact they are now unwell. So I would like to support this as well, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Avery.
I just wanted to get further clarification. I know, that's so annoying. Further clarification on when the buildings are being developed. Where would the existing dementia patients, if they're called patients, be moved to, based on their frame of mind and, you know, the way that they are currently settled in the existing lodge? Where would they be displaced to, and then when would they be moved back to the lodge?
The existing care home is for a range of care. It's not just for dementia or neurological. It's actually a range of elderly care that it provides. It's actually providing inadequate care at the moment. So it is an increase in the care. The new facility will be a better facility for care for future residents as well as existing residents, should they be for neurological care. It will be for the applicant to arrange for alternative care and not for a planning matter.
Okay, fine. Nobody else wishing to speak? In that case, we have one motion completed, which is for approval, moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Fraser. Can I see those in favour, please?
Eight in favour.
And those against?
2.
So that is approved. Thank you. Okay, moving rapidly on. Item 6.2, number 4, Rectory Park. Presenting officer is Laura Field. Laura, when you're ready, please. Tony, could you turn your mic off? Thanks.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for Rectory Park. Please note the addendum, which does include additional representations and an accurate drawing with the site plan showing also the approved scheme. The site is for the demolition of the existing building and the erection of a 2-storey building with accommodation in the roof space for 3 2-bedroom, 2 1-bedroom and 2 3-bedroom flats, formation of the vehicular access onto Burrowdale Drive and the provision of associated car parking spaces, cycle storage and refuse storage. The slide here shows the site outlined in red here, showing 4 Rectory Park, and the neighbouring property here at number 2 Rectory Park, and the neighbour to the rear of the site is facing Burradale Drive, number 2 here. This shows an overview of the site here, again outlined in red here, showing the relationship between number 2 Rectory Park and number 2 Burradale Drive. A photograph shows the application site here and number 2 Rectory Park on the corner of Burradale Drive here. Looking up towards the site here, towards the right here, looking up Burradale Drive, you can just see number 2 here. This is looking directly onto the site where the proposed car parking and the vehicular access is proposed to be sited, and number 2 Burradale Drive here. This slide shows the application site. It's just worth noting the principle of the site for residential development for a flatted scheme has been established in the 2017 Planning Permission, and that included the location of the car parking off of Burradale Drive here and the building form and design here. You can just see, which is actually in your addendum, the outline of the approved scheme outlined in red here. The bays of the scheme are slightly larger in the scheme before us this evening. The other changes are internal, to increase the number of flats from 6 to 7 and to include a mix that includes 2 3-bedroom units. The distance from the neighbours at number 2 Rectory Park remains the same. Here's the side of the front elevation here and the side elevation here, which shows the design in traditional appearance and respects the main street scene. The rear of the site and the sides of the site, again, in traditional appearance, which respects the character of the area. A CGI of the scheme. It's a good scheme which introduces family units from the approved scheme. The recommendation is to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or clarification? No? Okay. We have a number of people wish to address us. Mr Munt, who is an objector, Mr Philpott, who is the applicant's agent, and Councillor Pollard, who is a local referring ward councillor. So, starting off, Mr Munt, you have up to 3 minutes to tell us about your concerns. Thank you.
Right, just a couple of points I'd like to cover, really. One is that I note that this developer, there seems to be a pattern of applying for a reasonably modest proposal, which in this case was approved, and then going on to adding units. So specifically on this one, there was, as you've noted, 6 2-bedroom, of which 4 were split-level maisonettes, which I recall being commended by the previous committee. Then there was an application for 2 1-bedroom and 5 2-bedroom flats some months later, which, for reasons I don't know, was withdrawn. And now we've got this proposal for 2 3-bedroom flats, 3 2-bedroom and 2 1-bedroom, crammed into virtually the same space, as we've seen from the outline 1 year on. One note, really, why doesn't the developer get on with the permission that they've had? I'd be interested to hear the answer. I do note from your report, which you will have seen, some errors and inconsistencies. So the briefing document shows 7 parking spaces on the front and 3.1 within the document, whereas the drawings which you've seen clearly show 6, and further on in the document it's also 6, as shown in section 8.24. I'd have to wonder, you've got 7 flats there, 6 parking spaces. Which flat doesn't get an off-road space? Or is it a free-for-all? And if we can't trust the details like that, how can we believe that some of these other things will actually be installed, such as the child play space, which I gather is now required? It's recognised in the report that the location has a PTAL of 1B, so I wonder, how does failing to meet the one-to-one parking ratio promote sustainable travel? Anyone who uses the 412 bus, which runs outside, knows that it can be somewhat unreliable and full at peak times, and it's a 20-minute walk to the nearest station. It's not totally ideal for the families which I gather the three-bedroom apartments are targeted at. So it's hard to avoid the opinion that the developer has no regard for the neighbours and not that much for the intended inhabitants. And I would just sum up by saying this is the third bite at the cherry, which I only see as being motivated by profit and not delivery of high-quality housing, which I agree we all need.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Philpott, you have up to 3 minutes to tell us about your application. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors and members of the committee. My name is Mark Philpott, to represent One Planning Consultants and speak on behalf of the applicant. We welcome the officer's recommendation for approval and feel the committee report provides a fair and balanced assessment of the planning issues of this site. Aventia has a strong track record of delivering developments within the Borough of Croydon, and members will be familiar with the developer and previous schemes. As already set out to members, the site benefits from planning approval for a 6-unit scheme approved at committee last year. The new proposal seeks only minor external changes to this scheme in order to accommodate an additional unit. These changes relate to an increase of 1 metre in width and 0.8 metres in depth, whilst retaining good levels of boundary separation. No increase in height is proposed. The new mix of units will provide an additional 3-bed family unit, which the council seeks to encourage. As set out within the committee report, the quality of architectural design is considered to be high, and the proposed flatted development would have a traditional appearance in keeping with the street scene and would be virtually indifferent from the consented scheme. The building would be no further forward than that already approved and would respect the scale, rhythm and massing of development along this part of Rectory Park. There is no direct overlooking to adjacent dwellings and no balconies on upper floors. The development will create high-quality living conditions for future occupiers, with all rooms exceeding nationally prescribed minimum space standards. 3-bed units will have large private external amenity space, and small units will share communal amenity space. The development will feature a parking ratio of almost 1-to-1 within an accessible location, and no objections have been received from highways on the spaces. The proposed parking area will be to the rear of the plot, and hard surfacing will be reduced by approximately 33% over what's there already. And in addition, there will be significant soft landscaping and tree planting to be introduced. In summary, the proposal is considered to provide a sensitively designed residential development of high quality, the benefits of which significantly outweigh any potential harm. It represents a sustainable form of development, comprising new housing within an accessible location, and contributes to an identified housing need. And it's hoped members can support the application this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Pollard, you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This application is one of a steady stream of applications from a developer who's proved more interested in getting planning permission on sites than actually building anything, as far as I can see. Riddlesdown Residents Association have quite rightly been making a considerable fuss about the fact that many of their applications seem to be cut and pasted from one site to the next, with the result that whole chunks of each application are wrong or misleading. For example, this is the third application on this site, but they're still talking up the high PTAL rating, which is actually a low PTAL rating. And there are many other factual inaccuracies. So given the sort of casual and slapdash nature of the application, it's hard to see how the application can be determined until it's of an acceptable quality of accuracy. The application is denser than its predecessor, which was denser than that allowed for in the current London plan. For a suburban area of PTAL rating 1B, the London plan shows that 150 to 200 habitable rooms per hectare is appropriate, but this is now at 289 habitable rooms per hectare, compared to 252 before. In terms of dominance, the building massing will be greater than the consented scheme, and given that the surrounding close is made up of very low-rise bungalows, that will be very overbearing on the area. I'm also concerned about the parking. As this is a low PTAL area, it seems likely that there will be at least one car per flat, especially as several are three-bedroom. To my mind, the quality of parking is inadequate and the space allowed insufficient, so that most vehicles will have to reverse in or out. Borrowdale Drive is used for much of the weekend for parental parking, for football and cricket matches on nearby fields, and I'm concerned both about the quantum of parking and the road safety around the reversing in this context. I'm not opposed to the principle of locating flats on this site, but I think this application is too much and for a modest-sized site, and I urge the committee to refuse it on that grounds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments from the officers?
Briefly, obviously there is a planning consent on this site for 6 units at the moment, and what we really need to look at is what the changes are from that consented scheme, considering the proposed scheme. It's a modest change to the development to actually achieve a 7th unit on the site. Yes, there are only 6 car parking spaces, but I think it would be hard to argue that one additional car parking space would have a detrimental impact on the highway.
Thank you. I'm going to bring myself in first on this one, and then Councillor Brew. The additional impact of the slight increase in the size of the building will have no detrimental impact, and yet that small increase will provide an additional home. I think that's a very reasonable proposal. Yes, it would have been great if the original application that came forward was the scheme that we're now looking at. But actually it's down to the developers if they wish to put in application after application. That's not something that we can control, and that's their right to do that. In terms of London planned densities, as we all know and we hear regularly, the London planned densities are indicative and should not be taken in a mechanistic manner, I think is the term that they use. It's a design-led approach. Our local plan now encourages 3-storey development to help provide the homes that we need, and this additional home will help towards that target. It's also clear that there is on-street parking available, and quite a significant amount of on-street parking available, that would help would accommodate the additional spaces if they are required. So I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation for approval. Councillor Brew.
Chair. Just following up on the car park business, it's very strange that all flats bar one have one space. How is the one going to be allocated, or conversely, how are the others? I mean, will they be sold separately? What will be the process for that?
And is that of any relevance in terms of planning? Because that's not the kind of thing normally we would consider.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say that's not a material planning consideration.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is a scheme that we've obviously seen before, and for me it is an overdevelopment and over-intensification of this site. But having said that, the principle of development has already been determined by this committee on a previous occasion. So it's a shame that we're losing a family home, but that's been determined previously. I think that the problem is, and I think the objector raised this, it's incredibly frustrating for local residents when they keep seeing these schemes come back time and time again, on this particular one 3 times. We see these small incremental changes to the schemes. We've seen the same factual errors coming through in the paperwork every time, and locals know that these things are wrong. So I think it's incredibly frustrating for local residents, and I can understand why they would then object to the particular proposal before them. However, on this occasion, the amendments are so minor that there are no planning reasons to actually refuse the application that's before us. So whilst I feel the original approval was flawed, I can find no reason to put forward a reason to object to this particular scheme tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. I think the principle of the scheme has been established. There's a minor alteration, an additional flat. It's annoying that developers do that, but I think they're in the rights to do it, which perhaps tells them to get the scheme right in the first place. But I can't find any reason to object to the scheme, so I'm going to second approval.
Okay. I can't see anybody else indicating, so we've got the one motion before us for approval, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Fraser. Can I see those in favour?
Seven.
And those against? And abstentions?
2.
Any abstentions? We're missing one vote.
Can we re-vote?
Sorry, right, okay. Okay, can I see those in favour of approval?
8.
And those against?
2.
Okay, excellent. Despite the late hour, I think that can just about tell that that is correct. So that is approved. Thank you. Next item is item 6.4, which is St James's Hall. Nicola, do you want to just give us a quick explanation of the situation regarding this application, which is now not an application?
Yes. If I can refer you to your addendum papers. Today we have received notification that an appeal has been made against the non-determination of this application. Once effectively an appeal is made to the Planning Inspectorate, the ability to decide the application is taken out of the local authority's hands. So whereas this evening we put a recommendation to you to grant planning permission, there is an alteration now to that recommendation. We need to decide whether we want to contest, so fight the appeal, or not contest the appeal, so not fight the appeal. Bearing in mind the officer's recommendation was to grant planning permission, the recommendation as set out now in your addendum papers is to not contest the forthcoming appeal, subject to the Planning Inspectorate and the appellant, as they would be known in the appeal situation, and taking on board the recommended conditions as set out in your papers.
Thank you very much. Okay, so presenting officer is Laura Field again. Laura, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to note the addendum, and this application is for St James's Hall, Little Roke Avenue, for the partial demolition of the existing building and the erection of a single-stroke two-storey extensions to provide a terrace of 2 3-bed 4-person houses and 4 2-bed 3-person houses with private amenity space and 5 car parking spaces. This slide shows the application site in red here. The St James's Hall is here, and number 10 Lower Road is here, and number 90 Little Roke Avenue is here. Properties of a terrace nature are in Roke Lodge Road here. This slide shows the relationship between the existing St James's Hall and the surrounding residential properties. So the application was, I'll just show you the number 90 Little Roke Avenue here and number 10 Lower Road here. It's worth noting the application was subject to a previous appeal back in 2017. The appeal was dismissed only on the impact on the outlook of number 10 Lower Road, which is here, and number 90 Little Roke Road, which is here. The inspector found the scheme to be acceptable in all other aspects with regards to parking design. This photograph shows the existing relationship between number 90, which is the garden here, and the existing hall here, which is St James's Hall, with the windows and the garden space for number 90, Little Roke Avenue. This slide is looking towards Little Roke Avenue and shows the existing St James's Hall here and the gardens of Roke Lodge Road here. This photograph shows the site just in the corner here and looking up Little Roke Avenue here. The applicant has sought to overcome the inspector's concerns by looking to increase the footprint of the existing building and work with the existing building on the site with extensions. So the distance from number 10 Lower Road has the distance from let me get the numbers right. So number 10 Lower Road. So the inspector's concern was the impact of on number 10 here. And the distance has now increased from the dismissed appeal that was 0.5 metres to 2.3 metres here. The overall scheme has reduced in massing to reflect the existing situation, which will become clearer in the elevations. So the site is for extensions to the existing building. So you can see the existing front elevation and the proposed elevation. So the proposed scheme uses a hipped roof to reduce the massing and pulled off the boundary with number 10. The rear elevation here, and it's important to note that it's a similar relationship with the existing situation. Overall, this scheme addresses the inspector's concerns, and the recommendation is to not contest the appeal. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Questions for clarification? No? In that case, we've got people wishing to address us. We have Mr Wadsley, who is an objector, Mr Grant, who is the applicant's agent, and we have Councillor O'Connell, who is a referring ward councillor. So, gentlemen, you'll each have up to 3 minutes to tell us about your particular perspective on this application, starting with Mr Wadsley, please. When you're ready.
Thank you very much. Mr Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Mike Wadsley, and my wife and I have lived happily at 90 Little Oak Avenue for the past 36 years. We strongly object to this proposed development, as it will have a huge impact on our quality of life and enjoyment of our garden during and after the development. When in existence, the church hall was only used occasionally, for a few hours perhaps each week. With the terrace of 6 houses, which we consider to be overcrowding, this will be occupied permanently. We will be subject to general noise and aspects of day-to-day living, cooking smells, music, etc. I refer to the planning inspector's visit to the site on the previous application last December and quote, "Appeal dismissed for the harm which would be caused to the living conditions of surrounding occupants." And again I quote, "In terms of outlook, I find the proposal would cause significant harm to the living conditions of the people at number 90. We see nothing new in the current plans that changes this opinion. The southeastern extension and elevation will block out further sunlight from our garden and reduce the view from our kitchen window. We are not only worried about the building work, turning our garden into a building site, and probably affecting my wife's asthma, but also when the properties are occupied, we will be forced, we think, to allow access to several people for maintenance, inevitably causing damage to our shrubs and flower bed. Had there been a proper boundary whereby owners could access the rear of the building, the rear of their homes without troubling us, that might have been acceptable. We're still very concerned about drainage and if the properties are to have gas heating, where the vents will be. We certainly don't want the noise disturbing our peace and quiet and fumes affecting our health. Another worry is who would be responsible for enforcing the obscure window condition. The kitchens of the new development will get the full sun all morning, making them very hot, and we feel this will cause the occupiers, the residents, to change the obscure to opening windows. This would result in a total lack of privacy for us. As you can see from 32 other objections from local residents, we are not the only ones concerned. Parking and access to the site for building work remain a serious concern. There is virtually no spare parking at all at present in either Little Oak Avenue or the Lower Road. So there will be no place for the numerous vehicles, heavy vehicles, needed to transport materials, etc. Another local concern is the possible closure during building of the alleyway between the Church Hall and Roke Lodge Road, which will mean elderly residents and local Harris school children Harris Kenley school children and parents taking a much longer detour.
Mr. Wadsley,
Finally,
I'm
just
afraid.
one last sentence.
No,
Finally,
I'm sorry. I'm afraid your time is up. Sorry about that. We have to be strict on this.
I timed at 2:59
Okay.
before.
Thank you. Secondly, we have Mr. Grant, who is the applicant's agent. You have up to 3 minutes as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm the landlord's agent and speaking in support of this proposal. The latest proposal is a design that is a result of advice and comments received from previous applications, from the Appeals Inspectorate and from meetings with neighbours and the Council. The proposal is to retain the main section of the existing building, to demolish the ancillary buildings and to extend in a style to match. There will be extensions to either end next to 90 Little Roke Road and 10 Lower Street. Both these extensions are next to side elevations that do not have windows. The ridge height and the eaves height of the existing building will be retained, and these heights will be followed through on the extension. The ground floor footprint will be reduced, as existing extensions that line the garden boundaries will be removed, and this will mitigate the minor increase in the loss of outlook imposed by the extensions. The proposal includes a new first floor. It will have roof windows to the rear and single dormers to the front. The arrangement at the rear will not increase the overlooking here, and the front windows are a decent distance from the rear of Roke Lodge Road, and some degree of overlooking is inevitable in built-up areas. The previous planning submission in 2017 proposed a three-storey building at the rear of the site. This was refused as the Appeal Inspector found that the proposal would tip the balance beyond what is acceptable, and this new proposal, in our opinion, easily falls below that bar set. The windows and brick and roof will all match existing. The proposal meets the planning requirements for parking. In December 2017, the Planning Inspectorate declared that the original proposal was an appropriate balance between promoting development and preventing excessive parking that would not lead to an unsustainable parking pressure. The Planning Inspectorate agreed that whilst the parking provision will cause one extra car to park on the surrounding streets, this is less onerous than the current community use, for which there is no dedicated off-street parking. They also found the proposal parking to be safe, and this proposal has exactly the same parking provisions. So therefore, we request members to approve this application, as despite extensive marketing, no community organisations or commercial tenants are interested in the building. The proposal will be an attractive building that is an improvement of the existing appearance. It is restrained in size and will sit thoughtfully on the site. It will be an asset to local streetscape and not impose on its neighbours. It will make the alleyway a more attractive walking route, and this will improve security for local residents. And finally, the parking provision has proven to be acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor O'Connell?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is an interesting application, unusual in that the site is a village hall, and so the original application was refused and upheld on the grounds of harm to surrounding occupiers, particularly 90 and 10. 10, it seems to be they've moved a distance away, but I contend that the effect on number 90 is still the same. What I find unusual about it is the fact that the back of those 6 cottages directly abut the land of 90, and it's been said earlier, so these cottages, whoever good people may wish to live in them, have no back garden, and they go in and everything's glazed at the back. So I'm thinking around design. I'm not sure that is in itself a good thing. There are a lot of objections from the road itself, particularly on the parking issue. Now, I know that's not been sustained by the inspector, but if this was to go through, and I hope that you consider not, we will need to look at Little Roke Road for the parking issues around that, because this is 6 units, 2 times 3, 4 times 2, with 5 parking spaces. Without shadow of a doubt, there will be further parking on the road, and I think there's 2 spaces being lost. But I go back to the issue around the effect on number 90. I still believe very strongly that this is significant harm to number 90, to overlooking. The fact which is made earlier, construction is an issue, but that's not a planning issue. But these 6 units may have to have maintenance behind. People would want to open windows, and they will directly look upon number 90. So I think it would be sustainable, Chair, to counter the appeal on the basis that there will still be considerable harm to number 90, and I would recommend that the committee please do support the local resident. It's a shame when you lose village halls, and however, this may well be a development site. but I contend that it's too much on the small site, that it is 6 properties, and it does have a direct effect on number 90. I would ask you, if not to either refuse or whatever the phraseology is, contend the appeal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do officers have anything further they wish to add?
Just to comment on the reasons for refusal of the inspector, it was dismissed on the grounds of the impact, as we've discussed, on number 10 and number 90, and it was on Outlook.
Okay, right, thank you very much. Right, opening this to the committee. I'm happy to go first. Councillor Brew.
Sorry, just a small one. Again, it's not a planning issue, forgive me, but what are the rules and regulations about access to the rear of a property in a situation where there's, you know, one site directly abuts another?
Yeah. It's a private matter between neighbours, and a party wall agreement will need to be part of the discussion, but it's a private matter.
So if a wall needs repainting or something, the neighbours have to negotiate between themselves how that happens.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and I think it's important to consider the existing circumstance, because the church hall actually forms the rear boundary and the adjacent boundary at present. So that is an existing arrangement. So yes, if there was maintenance that needed to be done and they needed to gain access to somebody else's land, that is a matter which they would have to agree between private parties.
Okay, I'll bring myself in next, and then Councillor Perry. It is a shame to see the loss of a village hall type use, but clearly it's been marketed. There are no potential users out there that want to take this building on. And if there were, then it could be a wide range of different uses. The impact on the neighbours of the reuse and reactivation of that building could be significantly greater than the residential use that's now proposed. With regards to the parking, with regards people using the building, the windows could be in active use, being looked out as clearly glazed windows directly into the garden of number 90 as it stands. So I think the proposed reuse of the bulk, vast majority of the existing building is good in environmental terms, because it's recycling the existing building. It's creating 6 new homes. They're whilst they are individual houses, the amount of amenity space they've got is more akin to flats. But if this was a small block of flats, that would be acceptable. The inspector has already looked at this and has, considered most of the aspects of the development anyway, and felt the parking was okay. The fact that the bulk and mass of the building is now for the most of the length of number 90's garden is going to be the same as is there at the moment, except there will be opaque glazed windows looking onto the garden, so you won't be able to, there won't be any outlook there. And then there's a reduction in the mass of the building towards number 10 to create the garden space for one of the units, the last unit in the row. So it seems like a sensible approach to me in terms of the reuse and reconfiguration of this building, providing some greatly needed homes in the area. So I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation for approval. Sorry, not to contest the appeal. Yes, sorry. Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I don't disagree with much of what you've said, but I do have an issue with the amount of accommodation that's going into the proposal and into the building. There's a huge amount of accommodation being squeezed in. 6 units, but that's 14 beds, potentially 20 plus people living in this particular property. And I think the impact on 90 Little Roke Avenue is too great and is excessive. And whilst you say that church hall use could be more, I think the fact that it's residential, people will be living there 24/7, the impact is going to be 24/7, whereas a community use tends to be erratic, if you like. So for me, I think that there's just too much going on. We know that the parking's, the actual report says that it's a tightly parked cul-de-sac, so we know parking's already an issue. We know the planning inspectorate has already overruled that issue. But I think whilst it could be converted, it could make some really nice homes that we do need. I think it's too much, and I don't see why one family should pay the price to have their particular amenity destroyed by this development. So I move that we contest the appeal because of the impact on the living conditions of 90 Little Roke Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. I'll second your motion not to contest the appeal. I think this is an interesting design solution to reuse of an old building, and it's an area that's quite densely built out already, so I don't think there's that much additional pressure coming from this development. And there's seldom I see a scheme that's predominantly design-led, which I like, and I think this is a good one.
Thank you. Councillor Roche.
Yeah, I just wanted to second Councillor Jason Perry's motion to contest the appeal.
Okay, I see nobody else indicating, so we'll move rapidly to a vote. We've got the two motions completed. First one was not to contest, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Fraser. And the second one was to contest, moved by Councillor Perry and seconded by Councillor Roche. Can I see those in favour of not contesting?
Eight.
And those against?
2.
So that is passed. We will not contest, and the motion to contest falls. Okay, thank you. It's always interesting to have something slightly different, almost at the end of the evening, but not quite, because we now have number 59, Addington Road, which you will all, I dare say, be relieved to hear is the last application before us this evening. Presenting officer is Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. Right, this proposal involves the demolition of an existing house at 59 Addington Road, relatively close to Selsdon District Centre, and it involves then the erection of a replacement two-storey plus rooms in the roof to accommodate 7 flats with associated landscaping and some car parking. The proposal involves 4 on-site car parking spaces and also some cycle storage. This is an aerial photograph of the site, and this is, as I say, it's a detached property on Addington Road. It's probably about sort of 5 minutes walk from the district centre, and there's a return frontage here onto Mountwood, which is a return residential street, common with so quite a few bungalows within that particular street. Again, this is a view looking back, relatively sizable rear garden, but looks out into existing rear gardens at right angles. Moving through these are photographs within the front of the property. Sorry, the top two are the front of the property. As you can see, it's mostly laid tarmac. When I was there, it was I think it was about 4 cars parked within the existing tarmac area. And then this is a view of the rear garden. Reasonably good spacing between properties, with neighbouring properties set back. There are existing flank windows in this particular neighbouring property to the right of the site as you look at it from Addington Road. These windows are either secondary windows or obscure glazed windows to halls and bathrooms. You say a fairly sizable rear garden. Looking at the plans, the existing plans we have here, and then the main bulk of the proposal is sort of more or less in line with the rear elevation, but then clearly there are recessed elements that project further into the rear garden. And then there's a proposal for 4 car parking spaces and the cycle storage and bin storage onto Addington Road. Looking at the elevations, again, it's looking as a traditional detached house, but within it are 7 flats. Again, it's an existing family unit, so we seek to re-provide a family unit as part of the redevelopment, and there is the scheme proposes 1 3-bed unit, but then the remaining units are 1 bed and I think 1 2-bed unit. Looking at the plans, again, the 3-bed unit has access into its own private rear garden, and then you have 2 1-bed units onto the front, a similar arrangement up on the first floor, and then there's accommodation within the roofscape itself for a 1-bed unit. Again, that rooftop flat will be lit mostly by roof lights, but there is, so the main day room, as you can see, would be accessed into a balcony, a recessed balcony. We've looked closely at issues of, again, overlooking has been an issue, and privacy. It's been a point that's been raised by the residents neighbouring, and we feel that with privacy screens to the proposed balconies, which are relatively small in any case, we feel that the scheme maintains, first of all, outlook. It's, as you can see from the plan, it's a south-facing garden, so therefore it gets much sunlight during the day. And finally, I'm going to leave you with an image, a photo montage, if you like, that gives a flavour of how this scheme is coming forward. Please note that it's missing the cycle storage and the bin stores. But so the whole approach that we've been taking with these types of schemes is to look at contextual elevations, but then still looking at opportunities to increase capacity within our borough for additional housing. Chair, the recommendation is to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or clarification? Councillor Brew?
Can I just check, please? Do adjacent houses have parking in the front, like this one, or to the same extent? I'm not quite clear from that.
Can I just refer to the site location plan, if I may?
Yeah, Pete, because we've got access to the internet, we're just looking at aerial views, and yes, both of the properties on either side have forecourts and parking to their forecourts.
Are there any further questions? Sorry, I had a sort of slight senior moment there. No? Okay, fine. We've got 3 people wishing to address us. Mr Jordan, who's an objector. Mr Corcoran, who is the applicant's agent, and Councillor Pollard, who is the referring ward councillor. So, Mr Jordan, if you'd like to take a seat, please. Gentlemen, you all have up to 3 minutes to tell us about your particular perspective on this application. Mr Jordan first. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you've got some energy left. It's been a long night for you all. So let's see if we can focus again. A couple of things. Just firstly, we do have a southerly aspect to the garden, so a bit puzzled about the north aspect. Sorry, we have a north aspect to our garden, so there's not much southerly aspect. I am a member of the family for number 61 Addington Road. We live next door to the proposed site. Firstly, on the building itself, whilst the existing building line we feel is similar to the existing property, the idea of the new development, the rear building line, will extend quite a bit out, so we feel it will actually go out quite a bit further than necessary, really. It actually intrudes upon our light, privacy, and also we are on a gradient in the road, which doesn't come across in those sketches, so that actually does have a bit more of an impact as well, so I'd like that to be taken into consideration. We do feel it's an overdevelopment of the site, 7 units, 4 parking spaces. Not sure about that one. And then in your recommendations, it says that the good folk of Mountwood Close people will have the opportunity to park there, which I'm sure they're delighted about. Now, indeed, the parking is a big issue, I think, in the area. There's a lot of development of flats locally. You've got a new development just being built at the moment down the road, retirement flats. So that's going to be interesting to see how that impacts upon parking. And I'd like that to be taken into consideration, because I think that is a grey area. And I think with more and more parking coming through, I think that's something you've got to consider. 7 units, 4 spaces, I think there'd be a lot more parking in the area than that. Generally, as you go down the road, this is an A road. It's quite a busy road. There's always congestion outside, so that we always have cars parked along in rush hour evening. So I think you'll find that there is a danger here that people won't just try and go into the surrounding roads, but may well start to park on the highway itself. And I think that needs some thought as well. I think that's all I really wanted to say, but I just feel generally it's an overdevelopment of the site with 7 units. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Corrigan.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, members of the Planning Committee, thank you for this opportunity to address you this evening. Please, can I just quickly take this opportunity to thank all your officers for their much hard work in helping steer what we think is now we're very pleased with how the development's taken shape. The proposal introduces an excellent mix of much-needed new residential homes within a well-sustainable area, highly sustainable area, as we've heard from officers. Care and attention has been significantly taken, I can tell you, about respecting the amenities of neighbouring occupiers, in particular overlooking back-to-back distances, buildings been set off the boundaries. So effectively the proposal has been cultivated with that in mind and considered to fit well within the site's context and character of the area. In terms of impact on the street scene, the architectural design is one of a high-quality traditional scheme. The eaves and ridge height has been kept within that established pattern of development and street scene, and we feel blends in very well. And as I say, has been cultivated in positive conjunction with your officers. So in summary, really, Chair and members, just to quickly touch upon our fellow neighbours' comments. I've touched on the rear projection of the building. We believe that is an acceptable relationship. In terms of car parking, we are providing 4 car parking spaces for the development. There have been no objections, what I'm aware, from the Council's highway engineers, and we would anticipate that the family dwelling would have an allocated car parking space. And mindful of the number of smaller residential units, that provision is considered to be acceptable, wouldn't have any detrimental impact on the highway network or any highway safety issues. So with all that in mind, thank you to your officers for their hard work once again. We support the officers' recommendation and would ask you to approve the scheme. Thank you very much. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. Although I referred it on the basis that the 2 ward councillors remaining for Selsdon were stepping down before the election, and it was unclear who would be elected after the election. So I referred it as an adjacent to the border, but I'm actually speaking tonight on behalf of the newly elected Selsdon and Adderton Village councillors. In terms of the principle, can this building be replaced with flats, I think it would be difficult to argue that it couldn't be, given what has happened along Addington Road over the last couple of years. But it is an overdevelopment of a relatively modest site. The thing I particularly object to, or the thing that the councillors for the ward particularly object to about this, is the dormer window or balcony, and it's not clear which it is, because on the sections it shows it as a dormer window, and on the plan it shows it as a balcony on the 2nd floor. There are also balconies on the 1st floor, so there are a lot of balconies looking straight down the line of back gardens and therefore obliquely into the windows of all of those bungalows on Mount Wood Close. So that is the principal objection to this, really, is that not only are there windows there, on the 2nd floor having another skylight would not be a major issue, but having a balcony there is a clear and significant reduction in the privacy of a significant number of people who live in the adjacent close. So I'd ask the committee to refuse permission for this development on that grounds and ask the developer to give further thought to increasing significantly the amount of privacy that the existing residents will get. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr Smith, did you want to come back on the points there about the roof balcony type arrangement?
First of all, I'd like to apologise for getting my orientation wrong. Yes, we are north facing, and in many ways, when you're sort of north of due east or west, then sunlight isn't a consideration, although clearly enclosure and outlook is, and that's and how we deal with that is looking at angles from windows to feel how reasonable it is in terms of enclosure, and we felt that with the bringing the building in slightly and then recessing other elements of the scheme, it actually met the criteria that we look for in terms of outlook and enclosure. So we are satisfied with the relationships between the immediate neighbour. In terms of privacy, the image up here, we had a close look at this top balcony as to how it was to be formed, and it's in fact a recessed patio door that's then enclosed. It's like a recessed balcony in many ways that you get in a normal block of flats, which in effect reduces the amount of privacy looking sideways from that balcony. So after looking at it closely, we feel that that in itself and the design of that balcony with that recessed doorway actually helps mitigate impact in terms of overlooking. And as I say, these terraces here they're more or less enlarged Juliet balconies in many ways, and in terms of being able to have any meaningful activity on that space would be very limited. And similarly on this rear balcony, particularly as we're looking at privacy screens on either side. So, Chair, we don't feel that the balconies themselves are going to lead to a significant amount of amenity loss to the immediate neighbours. I think the final thing I'll say is on car parking, and I do appreciate the issues around, the expectation that people should have capacity to park within within the sites that they occupy. But I think there's also a recognition, or needs to be a recognition, that streets are there to be parked on as well, if they're wide enough and safe enough to accommodate the car. When we're looking at ways in which we can accommodate more accommodation in our cities, we have to think of different ways of accommodating the car and look at changing our habits of using the car. And that's very much the way I think the London Plan is directing us. We're looking at this type of accommodation in areas that are relatively close to areas where people want to visit. And you can visit Selsdon District Centre and the Sainsbury's and the facilities there by foot relatively easily. So we think that the amount of provision on site for parking spaces, even though we've got some flats, is satisfactory, and there is capacity on street nearby to accommodate on-street parking. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do officers have anything further to add? No. In that case, let's open to the committee. Councillor Brew.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I'm sorry, both of us have got a problem here. I don't think the PTAL rating has been said anywhere. I just wonder what it is.
The PTAL rating is 2, and I apologise that it's not stated in the report. I've just checked that before I came to the lectern.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'll kick off then in terms of the committee, and then Councillor Perry. I think this is a well-considered scheme, and we can see from the CGI before us how innocuous the building looks. It fits well into the street scene, and the considerations at the back in terms of the projection have been carefully considered, particularly in the way that the balconies are designed and inset. There's a reasonable amount of amenity space provided, and a level of parking on the site, and clearly there is off-site parking in the immediate vicinity as well. So all in all, I think this is a good opportunity to provide a range of different sized homes in this area, and it's a well-considered scheme, so happy to move the officer's recommendation for approval. Councillor Perry and then Councillor Ali.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think the principle of development is fine here. I think the building looks pleasant. There's certainly nothing wrong on the design aspect. I am concerned about the way that the building projects into the rear, and I know we had reassurances from officers about that. I am concerned about the balconies as well. It could quite easily not have projected into the rear, quite easily not have the balconies. and it could have been 1 or 2 flats less than it is being proposed at. I think also 16 bedrooms, 30 plus people, 4 parking spaces. I don't think the maths really adds up. And knowing Addington Road well, I don't think I would want to park my car on Addington Road. It's a very busy road at almost all times of the day and night. So I think, yes, it is a development site, but I think this is just a little bit too much. So I would actually move refusal, as it's an overdevelopment with inadequate parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ali.
So I think the proposed development provide a good quality residential unit that will add to the Croydon housing stock. I think in the point of parking, I think four parking spaces for 7 units, and along with 9 cycle parking, plus the on-street parking provides a very good mix. I think that promotes the sustainable modes of travel as well, even though the 2 PTAL doesn't help, but I think all things mixed together provides a good opportunity to promote sustainable modes of travel on the site. And I will second to grant permission.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brew.
I would second Councillor Perry's objection to this. The issue for me is overdevelopment of the site. Like him, I don't like the way the extension goes so far into the garden. And secondly, in terms of the mix of developments, we've only got 1 3-bed flat. So, you know, given that we're replacing what's obviously a family home by only 1 3-bed flat, and all the rest are titchy. There's 5 1-bed flats. I mean, I don't believe this reflects the required mix of property, which we all recognise Croydon badly needs. I'm also concerned about lack of parking spaces. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak? No. In that case, we've got 2 motions. The first to be completed was for approval, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Ali. The second was for refusal, moved by Councillor Perry and seconded by Councillor Brew. So, first off, can I see those in favour of approval?
Six.
Thank you. And those against?
4.
So that is approved, and the second motion falls. Thank you very much. And that brings the evening to a close. Enjoy the rest of it. Thank you very much.